The stagecoach wheels hadn't stopped turning when Clara Winters stepped onto Pine Creek's dusty main street, her emerald dress catching the afternoon sun like wildfire. Daniel Cooper stood frozen, hat in hand, watching his carefully planned future shatter. This wasn't the meek schoolteacher he'd been writing to for 6 months. "Mr. Cooper?" Her voice cut through the Montana wind like a cavalry charge. "Your bride isn't coming. But before you start mourning your lost convenience, perhaps you should hear what I have to say. Welcome to a story where quiet dreams collide with untamed spirits. Stick around to see how one cowboy's world got turned upside down. And don't forget to comment your city below so I can see how far this tale has traveled." Daniel Cooper had spent the better part of 32 years perfecting the art of silence. Standing at the edge of Pine Creek's only thoroughfare, he watched the approaching stagecoach kick up clouds of Montana dust that painted the October sky a dirty brown. His calloused fingers worked the brim of his best hat, the one without bullet holes or sweat stains, turning it in slow, methodical circles. This was supposed to be simple, a transaction as straightforward as buying cattle or selling land. 6 months of letters, careful negotiations through ink and paper, and today he would meet Margaret Winters, the modest schoolteacher from Philadelphia who had agreed to become his wife. The arrangement made sense, perfect sense, really. After 15 years of driving cattle from Texas to Montana, sleeping under stars that offered no warmth, and watching good men die over bad poker hands, Daniel had earned his peace. The ranch he'd built with his bare hands sprawled across 2,000 acres of prime grazing land. The house stood solid against the wind, and his bank account held enough to weather 3 bad winters. All he needed now was a quiet woman to share quiet dinners, someone who could darn socks and keep books, maybe give him a son or two to carry on the Cooper name. Margaret Winters, according to her letters, was exactly that. Educated enough to teach school, modest enough to accept a frontier life, and practical enough to marry a man she'd never met. "Stage is coming in hot," observed Jake Morrison, the town's blacksmith and Daniel's closest thing to a friend. Jake stood beside him, his massive frame casting a shadow that offered brief respite from the sun. "Driver's whipping those horses like the devil himself is chasing." Daniel nodded but said nothing. Words were currency out here, and he'd learned long ago not to spend them carelessly. The stagecoach thundered closer, and he could make out Tom Wheeler's weathered face atop the driver's box, his expression grim even from a distance. Something was wrong. Tom never pushed his horses that hard unless Indians were involved, and there hadn't been Indian trouble in Pine Creek for 2 years. The coach skidded to a stop in a cloud of dust and noise, horses heaving, their coats slick with sweat. Tom jumped down, his boots hitting the ground hard. "No trouble," he announced to the gathering crowd, reading their worried faces. "Just a passenger who insisted we make good time. Pay double for it, too." Daniel stepped forward, his heart performing an unfamiliar rhythm against his ribs. This was it, the beginning of his quiet life. He'd rehearsed this moment a dozen times. Help her down from the coach, tip his hat, offer his arm, speak the words he'd carefully prepared about being pleased to finally meet her. The coach door swung open. What emerged was not Margaret Winters. Or rather, it was not the Margaret Winters he'd imagined from her letters. The woman who stepped onto Pine Creek's dusty main street stood tall, taller than most women he'd known, with shoulders thrown back and chin lifted high. Her traveling dress wasn't the modest gray or brown he'd expected, but a deep emerald green that caught the light like bottle glass. Red hair, the color of autumn maple leaves, escaped from beneath a fashionable hat adorned with peacock feathers. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold, green as her dress, and blazing with an intensity that made the Montana sun seem dim by comparison. "Mr. Cooper?" Her voice rang out clear and strong, carrying across the street like a bell. Not the timid whisper he'd anticipated, not the modest murmur of a grateful bride. This voice commanded attention, demanded response. Daniel managed a nod, his prepared speech evaporating like morning dew. "I'm Clara Winters," she announced, not waiting for him to find his tongue. "Margaret's cousin." "I'm afraid there's been a change of plans." The words hit him like a physical blow. Around them, the good citizens of Pine Creek pressed closer, their curiosity palpable. Martha Henderson, the town's premier gossip, actually gasped aloud. "Is she—" Daniel started, then stopped, unsure how to finish. Dead? Married to someone else? Coming on the next stage? Ill, Clara supplied, her tone matter-of-fact. Scarlet fever. She'll recover, the doctor says, but it will be months before she can travel. She asked me to come in her stead to explain the situation personally. She felt a letter would be, She paused, those green eyes scanning him from boots to hat, insufficient. Daniel stood there, his carefully constructed future crumbling like a riverbank in spring flood. No wife, no quiet dinners, no peaceful arrangement, just this woman with fire in her voice and eyes that seemed to see straight through him. I see, he said, though he didn't see it all. Clara Winters smiled then, and it wasn't the gentle, grateful smile of a frontier bride. It was the smile of someone who knew things, who had plans of her own. Margaret also asked me to deliver this. She reached into her traveling bag and produced a letter, sealed with red wax. Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more private? I've had a long journey, and I believe we have much to talk about. Jake Morrison coughed beside him, a not-so-subtle reminder that the entire town was watching this drama unfold. Daniel took the letter, his fingers brushing hers briefly. Her hands were not the soft, delicate hands of a schoolteacher. These hands had calluses, small scars, the marks of someone who worked with more than just chalk and slate. "The hotel," Daniel managed, his voice rougher than intended. "I'll escort you to the hotel. We can talk there." "That would be acceptable," Clara said, then turned to address Tom Wheeler. "My trunks, please." All three of them. 3 trunks. Margaret's letters had mentioned bringing 1 small trunk, maybe 2. This woman had brought 3. As Tom and Jake helped unload the luggage, Daniel found himself studying Clara Winters more closely. She moved with purpose, directing the placement of her belongings, thanking the men with genuine warmth but no flirtation. When Martha Henderson approached with transparent curiosity, Clara met her with a smile that was friendly but revealed nothing. "Shall we, Mr. Cooper?" Clara said, turning back to him. "I imagine you have questions." Questions. Yes, he had questions. 1,000 of them, starting with who exactly this woman was and ending with what in God's name he was supposed to do now. But Daniel Cooper hadn't survived 15 years on the frontier by showing his cards too early. "This way," he said, offering his arm out of habit more than courtesy. She took it, her grip firm and steady. As they walked down Main Street toward the Pine Creek Hotel, Daniel was acutely aware of the eyes following them, the whispers starting already. By nightfall, everyone in town would know that Daniel Cooper's mail-order bride hadn't come, that this flame-haired woman had arrived instead. The Pine Creek Hotel sat at the corner of Main and 2nd, a 2-story building that Jake Morrison's wife, Sarah, kept with militant cleanliness. The lobby was small but neat, with a Turkish rug that Sarah had ordered from San Francisco and protected like a firstborn child. Clara swept in as if she'd been there a dozen times before, choosing a seat near the window where the afternoon light painted her hair copper and gold. Daniel sat across from her, placing his hat on the small table between them. The letter she'd given him felt heavy in his pocket. "You should read it," Clara said, nodding toward his pocket. Margaret was quite specific about what she wanted to say. He pulled out the letter, broke the seal, and unfolded the careful script he'd come to know over 6 months of correspondence. "Dear Mr. Cooper, I write this with sincere regret and deepest apologies. As my cousin Clara will have explained, I have taken ill and cannot make the journey we planned. The doctor assures me I will recover, but it will be several months before I'm strong enough to travel. I must be honest with you, as you have been honest with me in our correspondence. During my illness, I have had much time to think, and I have come to realize that I accepted your proposal for the wrong reasons. I was running from a broken engagement, seeking escape rather than partnership. You deserve better than a woman who sees you as a refuge rather than a choice. Clara has volunteered to make this journey to explain in person what a letter could not adequately convey. She is also in need of a new beginning, though her circumstances are quite different from mine. I have taken the liberty of suggesting she might find opportunities in Pine Creek, should you be amenable to assisting her in establishing herself there. She is a skilled dressmaker and a woman of remarkable capability. I release you from any obligation our correspondence may have created. I hope you will find the partnership you seek with someone who can offer you their whole heart. With sincere regret, Margaret Winters. Daniel read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it on the table. Clara watched him, those green eyes patient but alert. "Well," he said finally. "That's that then." "Is it?" Clara asked, leaning forward slightly. "Margaret seemed to think you might be willing to help me establish myself here, but if you'd prefer I take the next stage back east." "No," Daniel said, surprising himself with the quickness of his response. "That is, there's no need for you to leave immediately. You've had a long journey." Clara smiled, that knowing smile again. "I have a proposition for you, Mr. Cooper. A business proposition, nothing more. I am, as Margaret mentioned, a dressmaker. A very good one, actually. I've brought my equipment, samples of my work, and enough capital to establish a shop. What I need is an introduction to the town, someone to vouch for me. Help me find suitable premises. In exchange, I can offer you something as well." "And what's that?" "A graceful exit from this situation," Clara said simply. "Right now, everyone in town is wondering what's happened, creating their own stories. If you help me establish myself here, the narrative becomes simple. Your intended couldn't come, but her cousin needed a fresh start, and being the gentleman you are, you assisted her. Your reputation remains intact, and you're free to pursue other arrangements without the shadow of a failed mail-order marriage hanging over you." Daniel studied her, this unexpected woman with her unexpected proposition. There was sense in what she said. Pine Creek did need a dressmaker. The women in town had been complaining about having to order from Denver or San Francisco, waiting months for decent clothing. And she was right about the gossip. If he sent her away, the story would be that he'd been jilted, left standing like a fool. But if he helped her... "What happened to you?" he asked suddenly. "Margaret's letter said you needed a new beginning. Why?" For the first time, Clara's composure cracked slightly. Her fingers tightened on her reticule, and something flickered in those green eyes, pain maybe, or anger, or both. "That's my business, Mr. Cooper. All you need to know is that I'm here legally, I owe no debts, and I've committed no crimes. I'm simply a woman who needs to start over in a place where my past doesn't define my future." He recognized that tone, that careful dancing around truth. He'd used it himself when people asked why he'd left Texas, why a man with his skills had chosen to ranch in Montana instead of continuing the lucrative but dangerous work of driving cattle through Indian territory. "Fair enough," he said. "There's an empty storefront on Main Street, 2 doors down from the general store. Belonged to a barber who moved to Denver last month. I own the building." Clara's eyes widened slightly. "You own it?" "I own several buildings in town," Daniel said, uncomfortable with the admission. It sounded like bragging, and he wasn't a man who bragged. "The rent would be reasonable. You could look at it tomorrow, see if it suits. And in exchange? You stay long enough to let the gossip die down. Act friendly enough that people don't think I'm some kind of monster who drove away my bride. After that, we go our separate ways." Clara extended her hand across the table, a gesture that would have scandalized Margaret based on her letters. "That seems fair, Mr. Cooper." He took her hand, shook it once, firm and businesslike. But the contact sent an unexpected jolt through him, like touching a live wire. Clara must have felt it too because she pulled her hand back quickly, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I should get you settled," Daniel said, standing abruptly. "Sarah Morrison, she runs the hotel, will take good care of you. I'll come by tomorrow morning to show you the storefront." "Thank you, Mr. Cooper. You're being very gracious about all this." Gracious. That wasn't a word anyone had ever used to describe him before. Tough, yes. Fair, sometimes. Dangerous when pushed, but never gracious. As he turned to leave, Clara called after him. "Mr. Cooper?" "I am sorry about Margaret. I know you must be disappointed." Daniel paused at the door, considering his response. Was he disappointed? He'd expected to be. He'd expected to feel cheated, angry, frustrated at having his plans disrupted. Instead, he felt curious, interested, alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. "Tomorrow morning, Miss Winters," he said without turning around. 9 o'clock. He walked out into the afternoon sun, aware that Clara Winters was watching him through the window, aware that half the town was watching him emerge from the hotel alone. aware that his quiet, peaceful future had just walked off the stage in an emerald green dress and changed everything. Jake Morrison was waiting for him at the blacksmith shop, a knowing grin on his soot-covered face. "So, not quite what you ordered, huh?" Daniel picked up a horseshoe, testing its weight, avoiding Jake's eyes. "Her cousin. The bride's cousin. Margaret took sick." "Uh-huh. And the cousin just happened to be a redhead who looks like she could start a prairie fire with those eyes?" "She's a dressmaker. Wants to set up shop here." Jake's grin widened. "And you're going to help her, out of the goodness of your heart." "It's business, Jake. Nothing more." "Sure it is." Jake went back to his anvil, raising his hammer. "You know, Daniel, I've known you for 5 years. Seen you face down claim jumpers, rustlers, even that grizzly that got into Morrison's grain store. Never seen you look scared until today." "I wasn't scared." "No?" Jake brought the hammer down with a clang that echoed through the shop. "Then why'd you look like a man watching lightning come straight at him?" Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. Because Jake was right. Clara Winters had stepped off that stage like a force of nature, and for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Daniel Cooper had no idea what to do about it. That evening, he sat on the porch of his ranch house 5 miles outside of town, watching the sun paint the mountains purple and gold. The house was too quiet. He'd built it big. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, a kitchen that could feed a dozen hands during roundup. Built it for the family he'd planned to have with quiet, modest Margaret Winters. He pulled out Margaret's letter again, reading the line that stuck with him. "Someone who can offer you their whole heart." The truth was, he hadn't been offering his whole heart either. He'd been offering a business arrangement, a practical solution to mutual loneliness. Margaret had been honest enough to admit she was running from something. Was he any different? Wasn't he running too, from the violence of his past, from the emptiness that seemed to follow him like a shadow? His foreman, Sam Rodriguez, approached from the barn. "Boss? The boys are wondering if there's going to be a celebration. You know, for the wedding." "No wedding, Sam?" "The lady took sick." Sam's weathered face showed surprise, then sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear that, boss. You need anything?" "Just the usual. We've got that delivery to Fort Benton next week. Make sure the boys are ready." Sam nodded and headed back to the bunkhouse, but Daniel could see him shaking his head. By tomorrow, every ranch hand within 50 miles would know that Daniel Cooper's mail-order bride hadn't shown up. That night, Daniel lay in his too-big bed in his too-quiet house, staring at the ceiling. He kept seeing green eyes and red hair, kept hearing that voice that rang like a bell. Clara Winters. Even her name was different from what he'd expected. Margaret was a quiet name, a modest name. Clara was clear, bright, like her voice. He'd help her set up her shop, let the town gossip settle, then go back to his original plan. Find another bride, maybe through the newspaper advertisements. Someone quiet, someone peaceful. Someone who wouldn't look at him like she could see straight through to his soul. But even as he thought it, he knew he was lying to himself. Because Clara Winters had walked into Pine Creek with fire in her voice, and something in Daniel that he'd thought was dead had sparked to life in response. The next morning came too soon and not soon enough. Daniel was in town by 8:30, telling himself he was early because he had business at the bank, not because he was eager to see Clara again. The Pine Creek Bank and Trust occupied a solid brick building on Main Street, one of the few structures in town that wasn't made of wood. Daniel had money there, had helped establish the bank 5 years ago when the town was little more than a trading post and a dream. "Daniel!" Thomas Hartley, the bank president, greeted him with obvious relief. "I heard about yesterday. Terrible luck about your bride." "These things happen," Daniel said non-committally. "Yes, well, if you need anything. That is, I understand the cousin is staying. Sarah Morrison mentioned she took a room at the hotel. News traveled fast in Pine Creek. By now, everyone would know about Clara, would have formed their opinions based on that brief walk from the stagecoach to the hotel. "She's a dressmaker," Daniel said, "thinking about opening a shop. Might need to establish an account here." Thomas's eyes lit up. A new business meant new accounts, new opportunity. Wonderful. We could certainly use a dressmaker. My wife has been complaining about having to order from Denver. Please bring her by. I'll personally ensure she gets our best service. Daniel left the bank at 5 minutes to 9, crossing the street to the hotel. Clara was already waiting in the lobby, dressed in a burgundy traveling suit that made her hair seem even more fiery. She'd pulled it back in a severe bun, but little curls escaped around her face, softening the austere style. "Mr. Cooper," she greeted him formally. Punctual. "I appreciate that in a business associate." Business associate. The words were a reminder, a boundary. Daniel accepted it gratefully. Boundaries were good. Boundaries were safe. "The storefront's this way," he said, offering his arm again. This time when she took it, he was prepared for the jolt, the awareness of her presence beside him. She smelled of lavender and something else, something spicy and unexpected. They walked in silence for a moment before Clara spoke. "The town seems pleasant, larger than I expected. We're growing. The railroad's talking about putting a spur line through. If that happens, Pine Creek will triple in size within a year. Good for business," Clara observed. Good for everyone. They reached the empty storefront, and Daniel unlocked the door with a key from his pocket. The space was larger than it looked from the outside, with a main room that could serve as a shop floor, a smaller room in back for storage or workspace, and stairs leading to an apartment above. Clara moved through the space like she was dancing, her fingers trailing over the counters, testing the floorboards, examining the windows. She climbed the stairs to the apartment, and Daniel followed, trying not to notice the way her skirt swayed with each step. The apartment was simple but clean: a bedroom, a small sitting area, a kitchen with a wood stove. The windows looked out over Main Street in front, the mountains in back. "It's perfect," Clara said softly. And for a moment, her businesslike mask slipped. She looked young suddenly, vulnerable. "The light is wonderful for detailed work, and the space. I could have fitting rooms downstairs, workspace in the back." "The rent's negotiable," Daniel said. $20 a month for both the shop and apartment." Clara turned to him, eyes narrowed. "That's too low. The going rate for commercial space is at least 30, 40, with living quarters included." 25 then." 35, or people will think you're keeping me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Daniel felt heat rise in his face. 30, he said firmly, "and that's final." Clara smiled, that knowing smile that was already becoming familiar. 30 it is. "When can I move in?" "Today, if you want. I'll have Sam and some of the boys bring your trunks from the hotel." "That's very kind, but I can manage—" "Miss Winters," Daniel interrupted, "part of our agreement was that I help you get established." "Let me help." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Cooper." They went back downstairs, and Daniel helped her make a list of what she'd need: shelves for fabric, a cutting table, mannequins for display. She had most of her equipment in those 3 trunks, she explained, but there were items that would need to be built or purchased locally. "I can introduce you to the merchants," Daniel offered. "Make sure you get fair prices." "I can negotiate my own prices, Mr. Cooper. I've been taking care of myself for some time now." There it was again, that hint of a story she wasn't telling. Daniel wanted to ask, wanted to know what had driven her from wherever she'd been to this frontier town where she knew no one. But he recognized the walls she'd built, respected them because he had his own. By noon, Clara was moved into her new space, her trunks unpacked, fabric samples arranged on the makeshift shelves Daniel and Sam had hastily assembled. She worked with fierce efficiency, transforming the empty store into something that looked almost professional. "You've done this before," Daniel observed, watching her arrange bolts of fabric by color and weight. "In Philadelphia," she said, then caught herself as if she'd revealed too much. "Before. What made you leave?" Claire's hand stilled on a bolt of blue silk. "What made you leave Texas, Mr. Cooper?" He blinked, surprised. "How did you know?" "Your accent, when you're not being careful, the way you wear your gun, the rope burns on your palms that only come from handling longhorn cattle. You're a Texas cowboy who ended up in Montana. We all have our reasons for being somewhere other than where we started." She was right, of course. They stood there in the afternoon light, filtering through the clean windows, 2 people with secrets, with reasons for running, with carefully constructed walls around their past. "I should go," Daniel said finally. You'll want to get settled. If you need anything, I'll be fine, Mr. Cooper. Thank you for your assistance today." He turned to leave, then stopped. "There's a town meeting tonight, 7 o'clock at the church. They'll be discussing the railroad spur, but it would be a good opportunity for you to meet people. I could introduce you." Clara tilted her head, considering. "As your friend? Or as your former bride's cousin who you're kindly helping out of Christian charity? Does it matter?" "It does to me." Daniel met those green eyes, saw the pride there, the determination not to be anyone's charity case. "As my business associate, a skilled dressmaker who's going to provide a much-needed service to Pine Creek. Then I'll be there." That evening, the small church that served as Pine Creek's meeting hall was packed. Word had spread about the new dressmaker, and every woman in town had found a reason to attend the usually sparsely populated town meetings. Daniel stood near the door, watching Clara work the room like a politician. She had changed into an elegant but not ostentatious dress of deep green wool, her hair arranged in a softer style that made her look approachable but still professional. "Mrs. Henderson," Clara was saying to the town gossip, "what a lovely brooch. Is it a family piece?" Martha Henderson, who could usually find something negative to say about anyone, actually blushed with pleasure. "Why, yes. It was my grandmother's. The craftsmanship is exquisite. They don't make them like this anymore. I'd love to design a dress that would complement it perfectly." Within an hour, Clara had charmed half the women in town and intrigued the other half. She discussed fashion with the banker's wife, offered to teach embroidery to the minister's daughters, and somehow got old Mrs. Patterson, who hadn't bought a new dress in 10 years, excited about updating her wardrobe. "She's something," Jake Morrison said, appearing at Daniel's elbow. "Not exactly the mouse you were expecting, is she?" "No," Daniel agreed, watching Clara laugh at something the mayor's wife had said. The sound was rich, genuine, nothing held back. "She's not. You know the whole town's watching you two, right? Trying to figure out what's really going on." "Nothing's going on. I'm helping her get established, that's all." Jake snorted. "You keep telling yourself that, friend. But I saw the way you looked at her when she walked in tonight. And more importantly, I saw the way she looked at you." "How did she look at me?" "Like a woman who's trying very hard not to be interested." Daniel turned to Jake, ready to argue, but the meeting was called to order. The railroad discussion dominated the first hour, with heated debate about right-of-ways and depot locations. Daniel found his attention wandering to Clara, who sat with the other women but somehow apart, taking everything in with those alert green eyes. When the formal business concluded, Mayor Whitman stood up. "Before we adjourn, I'd like to welcome our newest resident, Miss Clara Winters, who's opening a dressmaking shop on Main Street." Clara stood, nodding graciously to the applause. "Thank you for the warm welcome. I look forward to serving Pine Creek and getting to know all of you better." "Miss Winters," called out Martha Henderson. "Is it true you're from Philadelphia?" Daniel saw Clara tense slightly, but her smile never wavered. "I've spent time there, yes. I've been fortunate enough to study with some excellent dressmakers in several cities." "And you're Mr. Cooper's intended's cousin?" This from Barbara Whitman, the mayor's wife, who had a talent for asking uncomfortable questions. "My cousin Margaret and Mr. Cooper had corresponded, yes. Unfortunately, she took ill and couldn't make the journey. Mr. Cooper has been kind enough to help me establish my business here." "How fortunate," Barbara said, her tone suggesting she found it anything but. "And how long do you plan to stay in Pine Creek?" Clara's chin lifted slightly, and Daniel saw that flash of fire in her eyes. "As long as there are women in Pine Creek who appreciate quality dressmaking, Mrs. Whitman. Based on the conversations I've had tonight, I expect that will be quite some time." A murmur of approval ran through the crowd, particularly from the younger women who were tired of Barbara Whitman's social dominance. After the meeting, Daniel found himself walking Clara back to her shop. The evening was cool, autumn crisp in the air, and the stars were just beginning to emerge. "Thank you," Clara said suddenly. "For what?" "For not trying to rescue me in there. I can fight my own battles." "I noticed. You handled Barbara Whitman better than most. She's not the first society woman I've dealt with who thinks she can put me in my place." Clara's voice carried a bitter edge. "I've learned how to handle them." They reached her shop, and Clara unlocked the door. "Would you like some coffee?" I just got my stove working. He should say no, should maintain the boundaries they'd established, should go back to his ranch and his quiet life. Instead, he heard himself saying, "Coffee sounds good." The shop looked different in the lamplight, softer, more intimate. Clara moved efficiently in the small kitchen area she'd set up in the back room, and soon the smell of coffee filled the space. "You did well tonight," Daniel said, accepting the cup she offered. "You'll have more business than you can handle." "That's the idea." Clara sat across from him at the small table she'd placed near the window. "I need this to work, Mr. Cooper. I need to build something here, something that's mine." "Why?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. Clara was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. "Have you ever had everything you thought you wanted, only to have it torn away because you wouldn't be what someone else demanded you be?" Daniel thought of Texas, of the life he'd left behind, the violence that had driven him north. "Yes." "Then you understand." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who understood loss, who understood the need to build something new from the ashes of what was. "I should go," Daniel said finally, though he found he didn't want to. "Early morning tomorrow. Cattle to move." Clara walked him to the door. "Thank you again, Mr. Cooper, for everything." He paused on the threshold, looking down at her in the lamplight. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was strength in her, steel beneath the silk. Margaret would have been easier, safer. Clara Winters was neither easy nor safe. "Good night, Miss Winters." "Good night, Mr. Cooper." He walked back to where he'd left his horse, aware that curtains twitched in windows as he passed. Let them talk. Let them speculate. The truth was simpler and more complicated than any gossip they could create. He'd expected a quiet bride and gotten fire instead. And despite every rational thought in his head telling him to maintain his distance, to stick to their business arrangement, Daniel Cooper found himself looking forward to seeing Clara Winters again. The first week passed quickly. Clara's shop opened officially on Thursday, and by Friday she had more orders than she could handle. Women who hadn't bought new dresses in years suddenly needed entire wardrobes. Daniel stopped by each evening, telling himself he was just checking on his property, making sure his tenant was settling in properly. "You don't need to keep checking on me," Clara said on the fifth evening, pins in her mouth as she worked on a dress form. "I'm quite capable of taking care of myself." "I'm not checking on you," Daniel protested. "I'm being neighborly." Clara removed the pins from her mouth, a smile playing at her lips. "Neighborly. Is that what we're calling it? What else would we call it?" She turned back to her work without answering, but Daniel could see her reflection in the window, could see the thoughtful expression on her face. On Saturday, trouble arrived in the form of William Thornton. Daniel was in the middle of examining a horse's shoe at Jake's blacksmith shop when the stranger rode into town. The man sat his horse like someone born to money, straight-backed, chin high, wearing clothes that cost more than most Pine Creek residents saw in a year. His black coat was perfectly tailored, his boots polished to a mirror shine despite the dusty ride. But it was his eyes that made Daniel's hand drift instinctively toward his gun. Cold eyes, gray as winter ice, scanning the street with the calculating gaze of a predator. "Trouble," Jake muttered, following Daniel's stare. The stranger dismounted in front of the hotel, handing his reins to young Tommy Henderson without looking at the boy. His movements were precise, economical, the kind of controlled motion that came from years of practice with a sword or pistol. Daniel had seen enough dangerous men to recognize another one. "Stay here," Daniel told Jake, but his friend was already reaching for the shotgun he kept behind his anvil. The stranger's voice carried across the street as he addressed Sarah Morrison at the hotel desk. "I'm looking for a woman. Red hair, green eyes, goes by Clara Winters. I was told she might have come through here." Daniel's blood went cold. He moved without thinking, crossing the street in long strides that ate up the distance between the blacksmith shop and the hotel. He pushed through the door just as Sarah was shaking her head. "I don't know anyone by that description, sir," Sarah said, her voice steady but her eyes flicking nervously to Daniel as he entered. The stranger turned, taking in Daniel's presence with those calculating eyes. "And you are?" "Someone who's wondering what business you have with folks in my town," Daniel said evenly. "Your town?" The stranger's lips curved in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You must be the local law." "Among other things." "Name's Cooper. William Thornton. The stranger extended his hand, but Daniel didn't take it. After a moment, Thornton lowered his hand, his smile widening. Not very hospitable, Mr. Cooper. Hospitality depends on the visitor's intentions. What's your business with Miss Winters? Thornton's eyes sharpened. So she is here. I thought as much. She and I have unfinished business. Personal business. What kind of personal business? The kind that's between a man and his fiancée. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, but he kept his expression neutral. Fiancée. Clara had never mentioned being engaged. Then again, she'd made it clear her past was her own business. If Miss Winters wanted to see you, she'd have told you where she was going, Daniel said carefully. Women sometimes make rash decisions when they're emotional, Thornton said, his tone patronizing. Clara left Philadelphia in a rather dramatic fashion. I've come to bring her home where she belongs. Maybe she doesn't want to go home. Thornton's false smile disappeared. That's really not your concern, Mr. Cooper. Clara Winters is my intended. We have a contract, witnessed, and legal. Her father agreed to the match before his death. She's simply being stubborn. A contract. Like Clara was property to be claimed. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. Miss Winters is a resident of Pine Creek now, he said. She's established a business here. If she wants to see you, that's her choice. If she doesn't, I suggest you get back on your horse and ride out the way you came. Or what? Thornton's hand moved slightly, revealing the pearl handle of what looked like a Colt 45 beneath his coat. Are you going to make me leave, Mr. Cooper? Because I should warn you, I'm very good with a pistol. I've won several dueling competitions back east. This isn't the East, Daniel said quietly, and we don't duel here. We just bury folks who cause trouble. The two men stood facing each other, the tension in the hotel lobby thick enough to cut. Sarah Morrison had backed against the wall, her hand pressed to her throat. Through the window, Daniel could see townspeople gathering, drawn by that invisible magnetism that preceded violence. The standoff was broken by the last voice Daniel wanted to hear at that moment. William. Clara stood in the doorway, her face pale but composed. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back in a working woman's bun, but she carried herself like a queen. Her green eyes moved from Thornton to Daniel, then back to Thornton. Clara. Thornton's entire demeanor changed, the ice in his eyes melting into something that might have been genuine affection if Daniel hadn't seen the calculation beneath it. My dear, I've been so worried. When you disappeared from Philadelphia, I feared the worst. As you can see, I'm fine. You're living in this... Thornton gestured dismissively at the hotel lobby, at Pine Creek visible through the windows. Wilderness. Working as a common seamstress. This isn't you, Clara. You don't get to decide who I am anymore, William. Thornton stepped toward her, and Daniel moved instinctively to block him. Thornton's eyes flashed with anger. Step aside, Mr. Cooper. This is between Clara and me. The lady doesn't seem to want to talk to you. The lady, Thornton said with emphasis, is my fiancée. We have a legal agreement. Had, Clara corrected, her voice steady as steel. Past tense. I returned your ring, William. I wrote you a letter explaining my decision. We have no agreement, legal or otherwise. My father is dead. Clara's voice cracked slightly on the last word. He's been dead for 6 months, William. Whatever agreement you had with him died with him. You're being emotional, Thornton said, his tone shifting to something softer, more coaxing. Clara, darling, I know you were upset about the wedding plans, about Mother's interference, but we can work through that. Come home with me. We'll start over. Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. Start over? After what you did? What I did was try to protect you from yourself, Thornton said, his patience clearly wearing thin. You were becoming hysterical about your little dress shop, making scenes at social gatherings, embarrassing yourself and me. I did what any concerned husband would do. You had me committed. Clara's composure finally cracked, the words bursting out of her like water through a broken dam. You tried to have me locked in an asylum because I wouldn't give up my business. The lobby went silent. Sarah Morrison gasped. Daniel felt rage, cold and deadly, spreading through his chest. Now Clara's walls made sense, her fierce independence, her determination to build something that was hers alone. "It was for your own good," Thornton said, as if drugging and institutionalizing a woman was perfectly reasonable. "You were becoming unmanageable." Dr. Morrison said a few months of rest would cure your hysteria. "There was nothing wrong with me except wanting to be more than your ornament," Clara said, her voice shaking with controlled fury. "I escaped that hospital, William. I ran with nothing but the clothes on my back and what money I could hide. And I will die before I let you drag me back to that life." Thornton's facade finally cracked completely. "You belong to me," he snarled. "Your father promised you to me. You signed the engagement contract. You took my ring, accepted my gifts. You're mine by right." "Like hell she is," Daniel said, stepping fully between Clara and Thornton. "This doesn't concern you, Cowboy." "It does now." Thornton's hand moved toward his gun, but Daniel was faster. Years of frontier living, of facing down rustlers and claim jumpers, had honed his reflexes to a razor's edge. His Colt was out and pressed against Thornton's ribs before the man could clear leather. "Here's what's going to happen," Daniel said, his voice conversational, but his eyes deadly serious. "You're going to walk out of this hotel, get on your horse, and ride out of Pine Creek. You're not going to come back. You're not going to send anyone else. You're going to forget Clara Winters exists." "You can't threaten me," Thornton blustered, but Daniel could feel him trembling. "I have connections. I have lawyers. And I have 6 bullets and a lot of empty land to bury you in," Daniel replied. "Your choice." Thornton looked past Daniel to Clara. "This isn't over. You can't just run from your obligations." "Watch me," Clara said quietly. Daniel pressed the gun harder into Thornton's ribs. "Time to go." Thornton backed toward the door, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. "You're making a mistake, Clara. These people, this place, they're beneath you. You're meant for better things." "I'm meant for my own things," Clara replied. "Goodbye, William." Thornton left, mounting his horse with stiff, angry movements. Daniel stood in the doorway, gun still in hand, watching until the man was just a dust cloud on the horizon. Only then did he holster his weapon and turn back to the lobby. Clara had sunk into a chair, her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. Sarah Morrison hovered nearby, clearly wanting to comfort her but unsure if it would be welcome. Daniel knelt beside Clara's chair, not touching her, just being present. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered through her hands. "I've brought trouble to your town. I should leave." "No," Daniel said firmly. "You're not going anywhere." She looked up at him, tears tracking down her cheeks. "You don't understand." "William doesn't give up. He'll come back or send someone else. His family has money, influence. They can make things difficult for Pine Creek." "Let them try," Daniel said. "This isn't Philadelphia, Miss Winters. Out here, money and influence don't stop bullets." "You'd risk your town for me? Why?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. The truth was complicated, tangled up in feelings he wasn't ready to examine. But there was a simpler truth, too. "Because nobody should have to run from someone who thinks they own them," he said finally. "And because Pine Creek takes care of its own." Sarah Morrison stepped forward then, placing a gentle hand on Clara's shoulder. "He's right, dear. You're one of us now. That fancy man doesn't know who he's dealing with." Clara looked between them, fresh tears spilling over. But these seemed different, softer somehow. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel stood, offering her his hand. "Come on, I'll walk you back to your shop." She took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. They walked in silence through the town, aware of the eyes following them, the whispers that would fuel gossip for weeks. But Daniel didn't care. All that mattered was the woman beside him, the way she gradually straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, found her steel again. At her shop, Clara turned to him. "You called this your town earlier." "Did I?" "You did. When you were facing down William. You said folks in my town." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Figure of speech." "No," Clara said, studying him with those penetrating green eyes. "It wasn't. You care about this place, these people. You've made yourself their protector. Someone has to be. Why you? It was the same question she'd asked about why he'd help her, and Daniel found he had no better answer now than then. Some things just were. The sky was blue, water was wet, and Daniel Cooper protected what was his. Would you like some coffee? Clara asked, changing the subject with merciful tact. I think we both could use some. They sat in her back room, drinking coffee that was too strong and slightly bitter, watching the sun set through the window. Neither spoke for a long time, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had seen each other's truths and hadn't run. He wasn't always like that, Clara said suddenly. William, I mean. When we first met, he was charming, attentive. He said he admired my independence, my business sense. My father was ill, dying really, and William was there, supportive, kind even. Daniel said nothing, just listened. After father died, everything changed. Suddenly my dress shop was an embarrassment. My opinions at dinner parties were inappropriate. I should be planning our wedding, not working with customers. His mother was worse. She had my entire life planned out. What I would wear, where I would live, how many children I would have. She stood, pacing to the window. I tried to compromise at first. I reduced my hours at the shop, attended their endless social functions, but it was never enough. They wanted to erase me completely, create someone new in my place, someone proper, someone tame. So you ran, Daniel said. So I ran. Clara turned back to him. The commitment papers were the final straw. William had been drugging my tea, making me seem unstable in public. When I confronted him, he had 2 doctors ready to sign papers saying I was hysterical, a danger to myself. If his coachman hadn't been sympathetic, hadn't left a window unlocked. She shuddered, and Daniel felt that cold rage again. The thought of Clara locked away, caged, her fire slowly extinguished, made him want to ride after Thornton and finish what they'd started. You're safe now, he said. Am I? Clara asked. You don't know William. He doesn't like losing. He'll come back or send lawyers or find some other way to force me back. Then we'll deal with it when it happens. We? Clara raised an eyebrow. Mr. Cooper, you've done enough. This isn't your fight. Daniel stood, moving closer to her. Not touching, but close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, could smell that lavender and spice scent that was uniquely hers. Maybe it wasn't before, he said quietly, but it is now. Something shifted in Clara's expression, a softening around her eyes, a slight parting of her lips. For a moment, Daniel thought she might say something, might acknowledge whatever this was building between them, but then she stepped back, the walls sliding back into place. It's getting late, she said. You should go. Daniel accepted the dismissal, understanding her need for distance after such a raw day. At the door, he turned back. For what it's worth, Miss Winters, I think you made the right choice. Running. Even though it brought trouble to your town? Especially because of that, Daniel said. Pine Creek was getting too quiet anyway. Clara's laugh followed him out into the night, and Daniel carried the sound with him all the way back to his ranch. The next few days passed in tense watchfulness. Daniel found himself spending more time in town, always with a ready excuse. Supplies to buy, business at the bank, messages to deliver. But everyone knew he was keeping watch, making sure Thornton didn't return. Clara threw herself into her work with renewed intensity. Orders poured in, and she hired Amy Patterson, the elderly Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter, as an assistant. The shop became a gathering place for the women of Pine Creek, who came as much for Clara's company as for her dressmaking skills. She's good for this town, Jake observed one afternoon, standing with Daniel outside the blacksmith shop, watching Clara through her shop window as she worked with a customer. Bringing folks together. She's just doing business, Jake. Sure she is. And you're just happening to walk by her shop 6 times a day. Daniel didn't deny it. There was no point. The whole town was watching them dance around each other, placing bets on when something would finally happen. That something came sooner than expected, but not in the way anyone anticipated. It started with smoke on the horizon, black and ominous against the afternoon sky. Daniel was at his ranch, going over accounts with Sam, when one of the hands burst in. Fire, boss! Looks like the Henderson place. The Henderson ranch bordered Daniel's land to the east. Tom Henderson ran a small operation, just him, his wife Martha, and their boy Tommy. Good people, if a bit prone to gossip. Daniel was on his horse and riding before the hand finished talking, Sam and 3 others right behind him. They smelled it before they saw it, the acrid stench of burning wood and hay. The Henderson barn was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the sky like angry fingers. Tom Henderson was trying to fight it with buckets of water from the well, a futile effort against the inferno. "The horses!" Martha Henderson screamed. "They're still inside!" Daniel didn't think, just acted. He grabbed a blanket from the ground, soaked it in the water trough, and wrapped it around himself. The heat hit him like a physical wall as he plunged into the burning barn. Smoke filled his lungs immediately, choking, blinding. He could hear the horses screaming, could feel their panic. He found them by sound more than sight, 3 horses trapped in their stalls by fallen timber. Daniel worked frantically, using his knife to cut the ropes, kicking at the burning wood. One by one, he got them out, driving them toward the door with shouts and slaps. The last horse, Tom's prize mare, was trapped beneath a collapsed beam. Daniel put his shoulder against it, pushing with everything he had. The beam shifted, just enough for the mare to scramble free. But as she did, another section of the roof collapsed. Daniel threw himself sideways, rolling as burning timber crashed where he'd been standing. His shirt was on fire. He rolled again, trying to smother the flames, trying to find the door in the smoke and chaos. His lungs were screaming for air, his eyes streaming tears that evaporated in the heat. Then hands grabbed him, pulled him. Sam and Jake, they'd come in after him. They dragged him out into the blessed coolness of the afternoon, threw him on the ground, beat out the flames on his clothes. "You damn fool!" Sam gasped, coughing smoke. "You trying to get yourself killed?" Daniel couldn't answer, too busy trying to breathe. His throat felt like he'd swallowed fire, his skin tight and painful where the flames had touched. But he was alive, and so were the horses. "Daniel!" He looked up to see Clara running toward them, her skirts hiked up, her face white with fear. She must have seen the smoke from town, must have ridden out with others who'd come to help. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his burns, afraid to touch and cause more pain. "You stupid, reckless man," she said, but her voice was thick with tears. "What were you thinking?" "Horses," Daniel managed to croak. "Horses," Claire repeated, shaking her head. "You risked your life for horses." "Tom's livelihood." Clara made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Of course you did. Of course you'd run into a burning building to save someone else's animals." Doc Watson arrived then, pushing Clara gently aside to examine Daniel's burns. They weren't as bad as they could have been. The blanket and his quick rolling had prevented serious damage. But he'd have scars, the doctor said, and his lungs would hurt for days from the smoke. "You're lucky," Doc Watson said, applying salve to the burns. "Could have been much worse." "Feel like I've been branded," Daniel wheezed. "Close enough," the doctor agreed. "You need rest, lots of water, and someone to watch you for the next day or so." Those lungs took a beating. "I'll do it," Clara said immediately. When everyone looked at her, she lifted her chin defiantly. "Mister, Cooper has no one at his ranch to care for him properly. I have medical training. I helped nurse my father. I can manage the shop and check on him." "Miss Winters," Daniel started to protest, but she cut him off with a look that could have melted steel. "You just saved 3 horses and possibly the Hendersons' future. The least I can do is make sure you don't die from smoke inhalation in your sleep." There was no arguing with her when she used that tone. Daniel found himself loaded into a wagon, Clara beside him, heading back to his ranch. The ride was torture, every bump sending pain through his burned skin and aching lungs. At the ranch house, Clara took charge immediately. She ordered Sam to bring water, lots of it, had the hands set up a bed in the main room where the air was better, and began mixing something that smelled terrible from supplies she'd brought from Doc Watson. "Drink this," she ordered, holding a cup to Daniel's lips. "Smells like dead skunk. It'll help your throat. Drink." He drank, grimacing at the taste. But she was right, it did help, coating his raw throat with something soothing. She helped him out of his ruined shirt, her touch gentle as she applied more salve to his burns. Her fingers were cool against his heated skin, and Daniel found himself focusing on that touch to distract from the pain. "This is becoming a pattern," Clara said softly as she worked. "You riding to someone's rescue. Just being neighborly." "Neighborly," she repeated, the word carrying a weight of meaning. "Is that what you call it when you risk your life for others?" "What else would I call it?" Clara was quiet for a moment, wrapping clean bandages around his torso where the burns were worst. "Hero comes to mind. Not a hero. Just did what needed doing." "That's exactly what makes you a hero, you frustrating man." She stayed with him through the night, forcing him to drink water every hour, checking his breathing, applying more salve when he needed it. Daniel dozed fitfully, waking to find her there each time, reading by lamplight or simply watching him with those green eyes full of something he couldn't quite name. "You should sleep," he told her during one of his more lucid moments. "I'm fine." "Clara?" It was the first time he'd used her given name, and they both noticed. "You don't have to do this." "Yes," she said quietly, "I do." "Why?" She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Because you stood between me and William. Because you made me feel safe for the first time in months. Because—" She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Because I care what happens to you, Daniel Cooper, more than I should, more than I wanted to." Daniel reached out, ignoring the pain in his burned arm, and took her hand. "Clara—" "Don't," she said, but she didn't pull her hand away. "Don't say anything. Not now, not when you're hurt and I'm tired and neither of us is thinking clearly." So he didn't say anything, just held her hand while the night wore on, while his breathing slowly eased and the pain faded to a dull ache. When morning came, bringing Sam and Doc Watson to check on him, Claire was asleep in the chair beside his bed, her hand still in his. Doc Watson examined him, proclaimed him likely to survive, and left more salve. Sam reported that the Hendersons were managing, their neighbors pitching in to help rebuild the barn, and through it all, Clara slept, exhausted from her vigil. "She's a keeper, boss," Sam said quietly, nodding toward Clara. "Woman like that doesn't come along often." "She's not mine to keep, Sam." "Maybe not yet," Sam said with a knowing smile. "But I've got eyes. I see how she looks at you, and how you look at her when you think no one's watching." After Sam left, Daniel lay there watching Clara sleep, seeing the vulnerability she hid so carefully when awake. Her hair had come loose from its pins, falling around her face in copper waves. There was a smudge of soot on her cheek from the fire, and her dress was wrinkled beyond repair. She'd never looked more beautiful. When she finally woke, blinking in the morning sun, she immediately checked on him, feeling his forehead for fever, listening to his breathing. "I'm fine," he assured her. "Thanks to you." "You scared me," she admitted, her walls down for just a moment. "When I saw that fire, heard you were inside." "I'm sorry." "No, you're not. You'd do it again." "Probably," he admitted. Clara shook her head, but she was almost smiling. "What am I going to do with you, Daniel Cooper?" "Stay," he said, without thinking. "Just stay." The word hung between them, meaning so many things. Stay for breakfast, stay in Pine Creek, stay in his life. Clara stood, smoothing her wrinkled skirts, rebuilding her walls with visible effort. "I need to get back to the shop," she said. "Amy will be wondering where I am." "Clara, rest, Daniel. I'll check on you tomorrow." She left, and the house felt emptier than it ever had before. Daniel lay there, burns aching, lungs still raw, thinking about green eyes and copper hair and a woman who'd stayed up all night to make sure he kept breathing. The next week passed in a blur of healing and tension. Daniel's burns healed quickly, leaving only faint scars as Doc Watson had predicted. The town rallied around the Hendersons, rebuilding their barn in just 3 days. And Clara? Clara kept her distance, polite but professional, maintaining the boundaries they'd established. It was driving Daniel crazy. "Just tell her how you feel," Jake advised, exasperated after listening to Daniel's careful non-questions about Clara for the 5th time that day. "It's not that simple." "Sure it is. You care about her. She cares about you. Even blind Pete can see it, and he's been dead for 2 years. She's been through trauma, Jake. That bastard Thornton tried to lock her up. She needs time, space. What she needs, Jake said, bringing his hammer down with particular force, is a man who'll fight for her instead of tiptoeing around like he's afraid she'll break. But before Daniel could decide whether Jake was right, Thornton returned. This time he didn't come alone. He brought two men who looked like hired guns, and worse, he brought a man in a black suit carrying a leather case that screamed, "Lawyer." They rode into town on a Tuesday afternoon, bold as brass, tying their horses in front of the hotel. Daniel was at the bank when Tommy Henderson came running to find him. "Mr. Cooper!" That fancy man's back, the one who was bothering Miss Clara. Daniel was moving before Tommy finished speaking. He found Thornton and his entourage in the hotel lobby, Sarah Morrison backed against the wall again, her face pale but determined. "Ah, Mr. Cooper," Thornton said with that cold smile. "I hoped we'd meet again. I've brought some friends this time. This is Mr. Blackwood, my attorney, and these gentlemen are Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones, private investigators. Private investigators who wore their guns like men who knew how to use them." Daniel's hand rested on his own gun, ready. "Thought I made myself clear last time, Thornton." "You're not welcome here." "Actually," the lawyer Blackwood spoke up, his voice oily and practiced, "we have every legal right to be here. I have documents that prove Miss Winters is contracted to marry Mr. Thornton. Furthermore, she took certain items when she left Philadelphia, jewelry, clothing, that belonged to Mr. Thornton. We're here to retrieve both the property and the woman." "Clara doesn't belong to anyone," Daniel said dangerously. "The law says otherwise." Blackwood opened his case, pulling out official-looking documents. An engagement contract, signed and witnessed. Receipts for gifts given in expectation of marriage. Even testimony from doctors about Miss Winters' fragile mental state. "Those doctors were paid to lie," Daniel said. "Prove it," Blackwood challenged. "In the meantime, we have legal documentation." "What do you have, Mr. Cooper? The word of a hysterical woman?" Daniel was about to respond, probably with his fists rather than words, when Clara's voice cut through the tension. "What I have, Mr. Blackwood, is documentation of my own." She stood in the doorway, but this wasn't the Clara who'd arrived on the stage weeks ago, or even the Clara who'd nursed Daniel through the night. This was someone new, someone forged in fire and stronger for it. She carried a leather portfolio, and her eyes blazed with determination. "Clara," Thornton started, but she ignored him completely, addressing the lawyer. "Mr. Blackwood, are you aware that attempted false imprisonment is a federal crime? Or that conspiracy to commit fraud, such as paying doctors to provide false testimony, carries a prison sentence?" Blackwood's smug expression faltered. "I don't know what you're talking about." Clara opened her portfolio, pulling out papers of her own. "These are sworn affidavits from 3 servants in the Thornton household, witnessing William drugging my tea. This is testimony from Dr. Marcus Webb, who was approached to sign commitment papers and refused, stating that I showed no signs of mental illness. And this," she held up another document, "is a signed confession from Dr. Morrison, the doctor who did agree to sign, admitting he was paid $500 to declare me hysterical." The room went silent. Thornton's face had gone pale, while Blackwood looked like he'd swallowed something sour. "How did you—" Thornton started. "Did you really think I'd run without protecting myself?" Clara asked, her voice steady and strong. "I spent 2 weeks before I left gathering evidence, paying servants for their testimony, convincing Dr. Morrison that prison was worse than losing your bribe money. I have enough documentation to have you charged with attempted kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy." "You're bluffing," Thornton said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Try me." Clara stepped forward, and Daniel saw Thornton actually step back. "I also have this, a letter from your mother to Mrs. Ashford, discussing how you needed to marry quickly to gain access to your trust fund, how any wife would do as long as she was presentable and controllable. Apparently your gambling debts are quite substantial, William." Thornton's composure finally cracked completely. "You little—" He lunged for Clara, but Daniel was already moving. His fist connected with Thornton's jaw with a satisfying crack, sending the man sprawling on the hotel's prized Turkish rug. The 2 hired guns started to move, but found themselves facing not just Daniel, but Jake Morrison with his shotgun, Sam Rodriguez, and 3 ranch hands who'd appeared from nowhere, and half the men of Pine Creek who'd gathered at the first sign of trouble. "I'd think real careful about your next move," Daniel told the hired guns, who slowly raised their hands and stepped back. Blackwood was already packing his case, clearly recognizing a lost cause. "Mr. Thornton, I believe we should leave. The lady has made her position clear, and the documentation she's provided could indeed prove problematic." Thornton struggled to his feet, blood trickling from his split lip. He looked at Clara with pure hatred. "This isn't over." "Yes," Clara said firmly, "it is. Because if you ever come near me again, if you ever send anyone after me, I'll take everything I have to the federal marshals. Your mother's reputation, your family's standing, your trust fund, I'll destroy it all." She moved to stand beside Daniel, and he felt her trembling despite her strong facade. Without thinking, he put his arm around her, pulling her against his side. She didn't resist, instead seemed to draw strength from his presence. "Get out," Daniel told Thornton. "Get out and don't come back. Because next time we won't be so civilized about it." Thornton looked around the room, saw the faces of Pine Creek citizens who'd claimed Clara as their own, saw the guns and determination and frontier justice in their eyes. He straightened his coat, trying to salvage some dignity. "Come," he told his entourage. "We're leaving." They filed out, Thornton pausing at the door for one last look at Clara. "You could have had everything," he said. "I do have everything," Clara replied. "Everything that matters." They watched through the windows as Thornton and his men mounted their horses and rode away. This time Daniel knew they wouldn't be back. The evidence Clara had, the unified front of the town, and the very real threat of frontier justice would keep them away. The crowd began to disperse, people patting Clara on the shoulder, offering their support. Sarah Morrison actually hugged her, and Martha Henderson declared loudly that she'd never liked the look of that Thornton fellow anyway. When they were finally alone, Clara turned to Daniel. "Thank you for standing with me. Always," he said simply. She looked up at him, those green eyes soft and vulnerable. "I meant what I said. I do have everything that matters. My freedom, my shop, this town." She paused. "And you." Daniel's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "Clara." But she pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. "I know we agreed to just business. I know you were expecting someone quiet and modest and everything I'm not. But Daniel Cooper, somewhere between that first day and now, I've fallen completely and utterly in love with you." Daniel removed her fingers from his lips, but kept hold of her hand. "You're right. You're nothing like what I expected. You're fire and steel and courage. You're difficult and independent and stubborn as a mule. And I love every damn thing about you." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "So what do we do now?" "Now," Daniel said, pulling her closer, "we stop pretending this is just business." He kissed her then, right there in the hotel lobby where anyone could see, and Clara kissed him back with all the fire he'd come to expect from her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara was laughing. "The whole town's going to be talking about this." "Let them talk," Daniel said, kissing her again. "I've got more important things to worry about." "Such as?" "Such as convincing you to marry me." Clara pulled back, her eyes wide. "Daniel, I know it's fast. I know you just got free from one engagement. But Clara, I don't want quiet anymore. I don't want peaceful. I want the fire you bring. I want the challenges and the arguments and the passion. I want you, Clara Winters, exactly as you are." Clara was crying openly now, not bothering to hide it. "You impossible man! How am I supposed to say no to that?" "You're not," Daniel said confidently. "You're supposed to say yes." "Yes," Clara whispered, then louder. "Yes, Daniel Cooper, I'll marry you. But I'm keeping my shop. I wouldn't expect anything else. And I'm not going to be a quiet, submissive wife." "God, I hope not. And I might occasionally do things that drive you crazy." "You already do," Daniel assured her, pulling her close again. "And I wouldn't have it any other way." They stood there in the hotel lobby, holding each other, two people who'd expected one thing from life and gotten something completely different, something infinitely better. Outside, the sun was setting over Pine Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and red that seemed to echo the fire between them. "We should probably tell people," Clara said eventually, though she made no move to leave his arms. Tomorrow, Daniel said, kissing the top of her head. Tonight, let's just be us. But of course, in a town like Pine Creek, word was already spreading. Jake Morrison was collecting on bets, Sarah Morrison was planning the wedding in her head, and Martha Henderson was telling anyone who'd listen that she'd known from the start those two were meant for each other. The morning after their declaration in the hotel lobby, Daniel woke to find his ranch oddly quiet. Too quiet. Usually by dawn he could hear Sam and the hands moving about, preparing for the day's work. But this morning there was nothing but the sound of wind through the grass and the distant lowing of cattle. He dressed quickly, his movements still slightly stiff from the healing burns, and made his way to the kitchen. There he found a note from Sam. Boss took the boys to move the herd to the north pasture like you wanted. Figured you might want some privacy this morning. Coffee's on the stove. Privacy. Daniel shook his head, smiling despite himself. The whole ranch, the whole town, probably knew about last night by now. He'd kissed Clara Winters in full view of anyone who cared to look, had declared his intentions as publicly as if he'd posted a notice in the general store. He was pouring his second cup of coffee when he heard horses approaching. Through the window, he saw Clara riding up on a borrowed mare, her emerald dress replaced by a practical split skirt and blouse, her hair braided and pinned up under a wide-brimmed hat. She looked like she belonged here, on his land, approaching his house like she had every right to be there, which, Daniel supposed, she did now. "You're up early," he said, meeting her on the porch. "I couldn't sleep," Clara admitted, dismounting with easy grace. "Too many thoughts running through my head." Second thoughts? She looked up at him sharply, then saw the concern in his eyes. "No, never. Just practical thoughts. Where we'll live, how we'll manage two businesses, what people will say. Since when do you care what people say?" "I don't," Clara said, then amended. "Well, not much. But this affects you too, Daniel. Your reputation, your standing in the community." Daniel stepped down from the porch, taking her hands in his. "My reputation survived being jilted by a mail-order bride. I think it can handle marrying a woman with fire in her voice." Clara smiled at that, the tension in her shoulders easing. "Is that how you think of me?" "Fire?" "Among other things," Daniel said, pulling her closer. "Beautiful. Brave. Stubborn as hell. Flattery will get you everywhere, Mr. Cooper." "I'm counting on it, Miss Winters." They stood there for a moment, just holding each other in the morning light, when the sound of approaching riders made them step apart. A group was coming up the road. Jake and Sarah Morrison, Doc Watson, Mayor Whitman, and his wife Barbara, and surprisingly, Martha Henderson. "Don't suppose this is a social call," Daniel muttered. "Welcome to small-town life," Clara whispered back, straightening her skirts and putting on her public smile. The delegation dismounted, and Mayor Whitman stepped forward, clearing his throat importantly. "Daniel, Miss Winters, we've come on behalf of the town council." "The town council," Daniel repeated flatly. "Since when do my personal affairs concern the town council?" "Since you proposed to Miss Winters in the middle of the hotel lobby," Barbara Whitman said tartly. "Really, Daniel, the scandal of it all." "What scandal?" Clara asked, her voice taking on that dangerous sweetness Daniel had learned to recognize as a warning sign. "Mr. Cooper proposed. I accepted. Where's the scandal in that?" "Well," Barbara huffed, "there are proper ways to do things. Courtship periods, formal announcements. You've been in town barely a month. Actually," Martha Henderson spoke up unexpectedly, "I think it's romantic. After all that business with that horrible Thornton man, seeing true love win out." Barbara turned on Martha with a look that could curdle milk. "True love? They barely know each other." "Sometimes," Doc Watson said mildly, "folks just know. I knew my Mary was the one for me the moment I saw her. Took me 3 years to convince her, but I knew." "That's different," Barbara insisted. "You were both from respectable families, similar backgrounds. Miss Winters is, well, is what?" Clara asked, her voice now genuinely dangerous. "Go ahead, Mrs. Whitman. Say what you're thinking." "Your trade," Barbara said, lifting her chin. "A shopkeeper. and there are questions about your past, about why you really left Philadelphia." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel felt rage building in his chest, but before he could speak, Clara laughed. Not a bitter laugh or an angry one, but a genuinely amused sound that seemed to confuse everyone present. "You're absolutely right, Mrs. Whitman. I am trade. I work with my hands, creating beautiful things that make women feel confident and lovely. I earn my own money, pay my own way, and answer to no one but myself. If that makes me unsuitable in your eyes, then I wear that unsuitability as a badge of honor." She turned to Daniel, her green eyes blazing. "And if Mr. Cooper chooses to marry a woman in trade, a woman with a past, a woman who refuses to apologize for who she is, then that's his choice to make." "Damn right it is," Daniel said, moving to stand beside her. "And I've made it. Clara and I will be married as soon as she's ready. If the town council has a problem with that, they can find themselves another place to hold their meetings, because they won't be using my buildings anymore." Mayor Whitman's eyes widened. Daniel owned the building where the town council met, along with several other key structures in Pine Creek. The threat was clear and effective. Now, the mayor said hastily. "There's no need for threats. We're simply concerned about propriety, about the town's reputation." "The town's reputation," Jake Morrison said, speaking for the first time, "is just fine. In fact, I'd say having a woman with Clara's courage and spirit as part of our community only improves it. Or have you all forgotten how she stood up to Thornton and his hired guns? How she protected herself and our town from their threats?" "Jake's right," Sarah added, moving to stand beside Clara. "Clara's brought more life to this town in a month than we've seen in years. Her shop is thriving, she's teaching the young girls new skills, and she's shown us all what it means to stand up for yourself." "But the speed of it all," Barbara protested weakly. "Sometimes," Clara said, her voice softer now, "when you've been running for so long, when you find a place that feels like home and a person who feels like safety, you don't want to wait. You don't want to waste time on propriety when you could be building a life." She looked at Daniel as she spoke, and he saw everything in her eyes. The fear she'd lived with, the courage it had taken to run, the hope she'd found here in Pine Creek. "3 weeks," he said suddenly. Everyone looked at him in confusion. 3 weeks from today, we'll be married. That gives the town time to adjust, Clara time to prepare, and me time to make sure the house is ready for her. 3 weeks? Clara turned to him, surprised. "That's very soon." "Too soon?" She studied his face for a moment, then smiled. "No, not too soon. 3 weeks it is." Martha Henderson clapped her hands together. "A wedding! Oh, we haven't had a proper wedding in Pine Creek in ages. Sarah, we'll need to organize the ladies. There's so much to do." And just like that, the mood shifted. Barbara Whitman might have had more objections, but she was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The delegation that had come to object found themselves planning a celebration instead. After they left, promising or threatening to return with lists and plans and 1,000 details, Daniel and Clara stood alone on the porch. 3 weeks, Clara said. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Unless, do you want more time?" Clara was quiet for a moment, looking out over the ranch, the mountains in the distance, the vast sky above. "My whole life, I've had people making decisions for me. My father, well-meaning as he was, arranged my life according to his vision. William tried to force me into his mold. Even coming here, I was following Margaret's suggestion, her cousin's failed plan." She turned to face him fully. "This is the first choice that's entirely mine." "You are the first choice that's entirely mine. So no, I don't want more time. 3 weeks, 3 days, 3 hours, it doesn't matter. I know what I want." Daniel pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and promise he felt. When they broke apart, both breathing heavily, Clara was laughing again. "We're going to scandalize the entire town." "Good," Daniel said firmly. "This town could use some scandalization." The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Clara's shop became command central for what Martha Henderson dramatically called the wedding of the century. Women came and went with fabric samples, food suggestions, and endless opinions about everything from flowers to music. Clara, meanwhile, was trying to run her business, prepare for a wedding, and deal with the reality of merging her life with Daniel's. The negotiations were sometimes heated. "I'm not giving up my shop," Clara said for the 10th time, pins in her mouth as she worked on her wedding dress. "I'm not asking you to," Daniel replied patiently, "but you can't live above the shop when we're married. The ranch is 5 miles out of town. Then I'll ride in every day." "In winter? Through snow and ice?" Clara glared at him over the white silk she was hemming. "Then what do you suggest? Keep the shop, hire someone to help Amy when you can't be there, and accept that some days you'll need to work from the ranch. Work from the ranch doing what? Darning your socks?" Daniel crossed the room, gently removing the pins from her mouth before kissing her soundly. "Work from the ranch designing dresses, planning new patterns, whatever it is you do when you're being brilliant and creative. You're trying to distract me with kissing. Is it working?" "Maybe," Claire admitted, then pushed him away. "But we still need to figure this out, Daniel. I won't be a wife who loses herself in her husband's life. And I don't want you to be," Daniel said seriously. "Clara, I fell in love with the woman who stepped off that stage with fire in her voice and determination in her eyes. Why would I want to change that?" They were interrupted by Amy Patterson bursting through the door. "Miss Clara!" "Mr. Cooper, there's been an accident at the mine." The Colton mine was 10 miles north of Pine Creek, a small operation that employed about 30 men from the surrounding area. Daniel was moving before Amy finished speaking, Clara right behind him. "How bad?" Daniel asked, already heading for his horse. "Cave-in," Amy gasped, having run all the way from the telegraph office. "At least 6 men trapped. They're asking for anyone who can help." Daniel looked at Clara. "Stay here. It's dangerous." "Like hell," Clara said, already hiking up her skirts. "I have medical training, remember?" "I'm coming." There was no time to argue. They rode hard toward the mine, joined by other men from town who'd heard the news. Jake Morrison brought tools from his smithy, Doc Watson his medical bag, and Sam Rodriguez brought extra men from the ranch. The scene at the mine was chaos. Women stood crying, children clinging to their skirts, while men worked frantically at the mine entrance where tons of rock had collapsed. The mine foreman, a grizzled man named Patrick O'Brien, was directing efforts, but Daniel could see the despair in his eyes. "It's bad, Cooper," O'Brien said. "The whole main shaft came down. We know there's at least 6 men behind it, maybe more. We can hear tapping, so someone's alive, but—" He didn't need to finish. Everyone knew that mine accidents rarely ended well. "What do you need?" Daniel asked. "Miracle would be nice. Barring that, strong backs and steady hands. We need to shore up what's left before we can start digging, or we'll bring the whole mountain down." Daniel organized the men with military efficiency, setting up teams to work in shifts. Clara, meanwhile, had taken charge of the medical preparations, working with Doc Watson to set up a triage area, organizing the women to prepare bandages and water. For hours they worked, the sun climbing high, then beginning its descent. The tapping from inside the mine grew weaker, more sporadic. Hope was fading when young Tommy Henderson, who'd been water boy, noticed something. "Mr. Cooper, there's air coming from over here!" Daniel rushed to where Tommy was pointing, a section of the mine wall about 50 feet from the main collapse. Sure enough, there was a crack in the rock face, and air was flowing through it. "There must be another passage," O'Brien said, excitement breaking through his despair. "Old charts showed a secondary shaft, but we thought it had been sealed years ago. Can we break through?" "Maybe, but it's dangerous. No telling how stable that rock is." "I'll go," Daniel said immediately. "No." Claire's voice was firm behind him. "You're still healing from the fire. Your lungs can't take the dust in confined space. Someone has to—" "I'll go," Sam Rodriguez volunteered. "I'm smaller than you, boss. Easier to fit through tight spaces." "I'm going too," Jake Morrison said. "My brother's in there?" They worked for another 2 hours, carefully enlarging the crack until it was just big enough for a man to squeeze through. Sam went first, rope tied around his waist, followed by Jake. The waiting was agony. Clara stood beside Daniel, her hand in his, neither speaking. Then, a shout from inside. "We found them. They're alive." What followed was a careful extraction that took 3 more hours. One by one, the trapped miners were brought out through the secondary passage. Jake's brother was among them, injured but alive. The last man out was barely breathing, his leg crushed, but Doc Watson thought he might survive with proper care. As the sun set over the mountain, painting everything in shades of gold and red, the mining camp erupted in celebration. Families reunited, tears of relief replacing tears of fear. Daniel stood watching, exhausted but satisfied, when he realized Clara was no longer beside him. He found her around the side of the medical tent, throwing up into a bucket, her face pale and sweaty. "Clara?" He knelt beside her, alarmed. "Are you hurt? Did something happen?" She shook her head, accepting the water he offered. "I'm fine. Just the stress, I think. And I haven't eaten all day." "You need rest," Daniel said, but Clara was already straightening, wiping her mouth with determined dignity. "I need to help Doc Watson with the injured." "Clara, Daniel, those men need medical attention. I can rest later." She worked for 3 more hours, cleaning wounds, setting bones, offering comfort to frightened families. Daniel watched her, this woman who'd come to Pine Creek expecting to be a simple dressmaker and had become so much more. She was magnificent, he thought, even pale and exhausted, even with her dress ruined by blood and dirt. It was near midnight when they finally returned to town. Daniel insisted Clara stay at the ranch rather than ride all the way back to her shop, and she was too tired to argue. He helped her from her horse, catching her when her legs buckled. "I'm fine," she muttered against his chest. "Just tired." "You're exhausted," Daniel corrected, carrying her into the house. "You pushed yourself too hard today. People needed help, and you gave it. But now you need to rest." He set her on his bed, kneeling to remove her boots. Clara watched him through half-closed eyes, a soft smile on her face. "Is this what marriage will be like?" she asked sleepily. "You taking care of me when I push too hard." "And you taking care of me when I run into burning buildings," Daniel replied, helping her out of her ruined outer dress, leaving her in her chemise and petticoats. "We'll take care of each other." "I like that," Clara murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "Partners." "Partners," Daniel agreed, pulling a blanket over her. He sat in the chair beside the bed, watching her sleep, thinking about the day's events. In 3 weeks, they'd faced down Clara's past, dealt with the town's objections, and worked together through a crisis. If that wasn't a good foundation for marriage, he didn't know what was. Clara slept through the night and most of the next day, waking only when the afternoon sun slanted through the windows. Daniel had been checking on her every hour, concerned by her pallor and exhaustion. "How long have I been asleep?" she asked, stretching. "About 16 hours. Clara's eyes widened. 16 hours. The shop? Amy's handling things. Sarah Morrison is helping. Everything's fine. Clara sank back against the pillows, then suddenly went very still. "Daniel, what day is it?" "Tuesday. Why?" She was quiet for a moment, clearly calculating something in her head. Then she sat up abruptly, her face going pale again. "Clara? What's wrong?" "Nothing. I need to get back to town. I need to see Doc Watson." "Are you ill?" "I knew yesterday was too much." "I'm not ill," Clara said, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. "I just need to talk to him about female things." Female things. Daniel felt his face heat up, but he was also concerned. "Clara, if something's wrong—" "Nothing's wrong," she said firmly, then softer. "At least I don't think so. I just need to be sure about something." She dressed quickly in a spare dress Sarah had sent over, her movements careful and deliberate. Daniel drove her to town in the wagon, the silence between them heavy with unspoken questions. At Doc Watson's office, Clara asked Daniel to wait outside. He paced the boardwalk for an hour, his mind running through possibilities, each worse than the last. What if she was seriously ill? What if the stress of the past weeks had caused some damage? What if... The door opened, and Clara emerged. Her face was unreadable, but there was something different about her, a trembling energy that could have been fear or joy or both. "Well?" Daniel demanded. "Take me home," Clara said quietly. "To the ranch. We need to talk." The ride back was torture. Clara sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, saying nothing. When they reached the ranch, she walked directly to the porch, sitting on the swing Sam had installed just days before. "Clara, you're scaring me." "What did Doc Watson say?" She looked up at him, and he saw tears in her eyes. "He said I'm pregnant." The world stopped. Daniel stared at her, unable to process the words. "Pregnant? But we haven't, we've never—" "Not you," Clara said quickly. "It's not, it can't be yours. We've never been together that way. Not his." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. He sank onto the swing beside her, his mind reeling. "Thornton?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Clara nodded, tears flowing freely now. "The night before I escaped. He forced himself on me, said it would make me his whether I wanted it or not. It's why I ran that very night instead of waiting and planning more carefully." Daniel felt rage like he'd never experienced before, white hot and deadly. If Thornton had been within reach, Daniel would have killed him without hesitation. "I should have told you," Clara continued, her voice broken. "When you proposed, I should have told you. But I didn't know. I didn't even suspect until yesterday when the smell at the mine made me so sick. And now you're trapped, engaged to a ruined woman carrying another man's child." "Stop," Daniel said firmly, taking her hands. "Stop right there." "But, Clara, look at me." He waited until those green eyes met his. "You're not ruined, you're not trapped, and neither am I. Daniel, you don't understand. I'm pregnant with William Thornton's child. A child conceived in violence. How can I what? Love you? I already do. Want to marry you? That hasn't changed. Want this child?" "Yes, Clara. Yes, I do." Clara stared at him in shock. "How can you say that?" "Because any child of yours is a child I'll love," Daniel said simply. "Because this baby is innocent of its father's sins. Because we can give this child something Thornton never could. A real family, real love, a real chance at happiness. People will talk. They'll count months. They'll know. Let them count. Let them talk. We'll tell anyone who asks that the baby came early. Happens all the time out here. And if they don't believe us, that's their problem." Clara was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, letting her cry out all the fear and shame and anger she'd been carrying. "I was so scared," she whispered against his chest. "So scared you'd hate me, send me away." "Never," Daniel said fiercely. "You hear me, Clara Winters? Never. You're mine, and this baby is mine, and anyone who says otherwise will answer to me." "The child will need a name," Clara said, still pressed against him. "A real name, not Thornton." "Cooper," Daniel said immediately. "The baby's name will be Cooper. My child in every way that matters." Clara pulled back to look at him, her face ravaged by tears but beautiful in its vulnerability. "How are you real? How are you this good?" "I'm not good," Daniel said. "I'm selfish. I want you, Clara. I want our life together. I want this child. I want to be the father he or she deserves. That's not goodness. That's greed." Clara laughed through her tears, a watery sound that was the most beautiful thing Daniel had ever heard. "Then be greedy. Be very, very greedy." They were married 2.5 weeks later, a few days earlier than originally planned. Clara had started showing, just barely, and they both agreed sooner was better than later. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, held on the ranch with the mountains as backdrop and the whole town in attendance. Clara wore the dress she'd made herself, white silk with touches of green that matched her eyes. Daniel wore his best suit, the one usually reserved for funerals and bank meetings. Jake stood as his best man, Sarah as Clara's matron of honor. When Reverend Mills asked if anyone had objections, the silence was complete. Even Barbara Whitman, who'd had plenty to say over the past weeks, kept her mouth shut. Perhaps it was the way Daniel's hand rested on his gun, or perhaps it was the fierce protectiveness in his eyes as he looked at his bride. "Do you, Daniel Cooper, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Daniel said. his voice carrying across the gathering. Do you, Clara Winters, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live? I do, Clara said, her voice clear and strong, the voice that had carried fire from that first day. Then, by the power vested in me by God and the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Daniel kissed Clara with all the passion and promise he felt, not caring that half the town was watching, not caring that Martha Henderson actually fanned herself at the display. When they broke apart, Clara was laughing and crying at the same time. Hello, Mrs. Cooper, Daniel said softly. Hello, Mr. Cooper, Clara replied. The celebration that followed was the biggest Pine Creek had seen in years. Tables groaned under the weight of food provided by every family in town. Jake had brought his fiddle, and there was dancing until well past midnight. Even Barbara Whitman was seen smiling, especially after her third glass of Sarah Morrison's special punch. As the evening wound down, Daniel found Clara standing at the edge of the celebration, her hand resting on her still flat stomach, watching the dancers with a soft smile. Regrets? He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. None, Clara said, leaning back against him. This is more than I ever dreamed of, Daniel. A real home, a real family, a real future. It's just the beginning, Daniel promised. We have so much ahead of us. A baby in about 6 months, Clara said quietly. A baby who will be loved and wanted and protected, Daniel corrected. Our baby. Our baby, Clara repeated, and Daniel could hear the wonder in her voice. Later, when the guests had gone and they were alone in their bedroom at the ranch, Clara stood before him in her nightgown, suddenly shy. What Thornton did wasn't... I don't really know how this is supposed to work when it's wanted, she admitted. Daniel crossed to her, taking her face gently in his hands. We'll figure it out together. We have all the time in the world. Tonight, we can just sleep if you want. No, Clara said firmly, that fire sparking in her eyes. No, I want this. I want to replace that horrible memory with something beautiful. I want to truly be your wife, Daniel. What followed was gentle and patient and everything Clara's first time should have been. Daniel took his time, worshiping every inch of her, showing her how it felt to be cherished, desired, loved. When they came together, it was with tenderness and passion in equal measure, and Clara cried again, but these were tears of joy, of healing, of finding home in another person's arms. I love you, she whispered against his chest afterward. I love you so much it frightens me. Don't be frightened, Daniel said, holding her close. I'll never give you reason to regret this. I'll never hurt you, never leave you, never let anyone harm you again. I know, Clara said simply. I trust you. Trust. From a woman who had every reason never to trust again. It was the greatest gift she could have given him. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Daniel's life. Clara's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though she remained stubbornly determined to work at her shop until Doc Watson absolutely forbade it. Even then, she set up a workspace at the ranch, creating beautiful dresses and teaching Amy Patterson the finer points of the trade. The town, as expected, had opinions about the early arrival of the baby, but Daniel's fierce protectiveness and Clara's complete indifference to gossip soon quieted the worst of it. Besides, Pine Creek had other things to worry about. The railroad announcement came through. The spur line would indeed come through Pine Creek, bringing prosperity and growth. William Thornton made one last attempt to cause trouble, sending a letter threatening legal action, but Clara's carefully preserved evidence and a strongly worded response from a lawyer Daniel hired in Denver put an end to that. They never heard from him again, though Clara later learned through correspondence with a friend in Philadelphia that he'd been forced to marry a wealthy widow to cover his debts, a woman who kept him on a very short leash. Poetic justice, Clara said when she read the letter, then tossed it in the fire. May they make each other miserable. As winter gave way to spring, Clara grew round with child, more beautiful to Daniel with each passing day. She continued to be a force of nature, organizing a school fund, browbeating the town council into improving the roads, and somehow managing to keep her dress shop thriving even when she could barely see over her belly. "You need to slow down," Daniel told her one evening in her 8th month, finding her on her hands and knees scrubbing the kitchen floor. "I'm nesting," Clara informed him. "Doc Watson says it's natural. Doc Watson also says you need rest. I'll rest when the baby comes." "You'll rest now," Daniel said firmly, lifting her to her feet and carrying her to their bedroom despite her protests. "You can't just carry me off every time you disagree with me," Clara protested, though she was smiling. "Watch me," Daniel replied, depositing her gently on the bed. The baby came on a stormy night in May, with Doc Watson attending and Sarah Morrison assisting. Daniel paced the hallway outside their bedroom, listening to Clara's cries, feeling more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life. "First babies take time," Sam Rodriguez said, having appointed himself Daniel's keeper during the ordeal. "My Maria was in labor for 18 hours with our first." 18 hours? Daniel thought he might go insane if this lasted 18 hours. It lasted 12. Just after dawn, a different cry filled the air, the lusty wail of a newborn. Daniel was through the door before Doc Watson could call for him. Clara lay propped against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in the blanket she'd spent months embroidering. "Come meet your son," she said softly. A son. Daniel approached slowly, as if sudden movement might shatter this perfect moment. The baby was tiny, red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that, when they briefly opened, were the same green as his mother's. "He's perfect," Daniel breathed, touching one tiny fist with a trembling finger. "He looks like you," Clara said, and Daniel heard what she wasn't saying, that there was no trace of Thornton in this child's face. "What should we name him?" Daniel asked. "I was thinking James," Clara said, "after your father." James Daniel Cooper. Daniel's throat tightened. He'd told Clara about his father, killed in the violence that had driven Daniel from Texas. He would have been honored. "Then James it is," Clara said, then yawned hugely. "Your son, Mr. Cooper." "Our son," Daniel corrected, taking the baby carefully so Clara could rest. "Our son." James Daniel Cooper grew like a weed in the Montana sun, sturdy and strong, with his mother's fierce spirit and what everyone said was his father's stubborn streak. By the time he was walking, toddling around the ranch with determined steps, Clara was pregnant again. This time, Daniel was there for every moment, from the first morning sickness to the quickening, from the swelling belly to the birth itself. "A girl!" Doc Watson announced on a crisp October morning, handing the squalling infant to Clara. "Healthy and loud, just like her mother." They named her Margaret Rose, after the cousin whose illness had brought Clara to Pine Creek in the first place. Margaret had written several times over the past 2 years, having recovered fully and married a schoolteacher in Philadelphia. She cried when she received the letter about her namesake, writing back that it was the greatest honor she could imagine. Life settled into a rhythm that was both peaceful and purposeful. Daniel expanded the ranch, buying adjacent land as the railroad brought prosperity to Pine Creek. Clara's dress shop became the finest establishment between Denver and Seattle, with women traveling from 3 territories to commission her designs. She hired 2 more seamstresses and moved to a larger building, though she still insisted on doing the most intricate work herself. "You're going to work yourself into an early grave," Daniel said one evening, finding her bent over her sewing by lamplight, little Margaret sleeping in a cradle beside her desk, and James playing with wooden blocks at her feet. "I'm building something," Clara replied without looking up. "Something that will last beyond us. The children will last beyond us. The children will have their own lives, make their own choices. This," she gestured at the workshop around her, "this is proof that a woman can create something substantial, something that matters. I want our daughters to know that." "Daughters? Plural?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Something you want to tell me?" Clara smiled that secretive smile he'd come to recognize. "Maybe." She was indeed pregnant again, though this pregnancy was harder than the others. Clara was tired all the time, sick most mornings, and her ankles swelled so badly that Doc Watson ordered her to bed rest for the last month. "This is torture," Clara complained, propped against pillows while Amy Patterson and the other seamstresses brought her work to approve. "I'm not made for lying about." "You're made for growing our child," Daniel said, sitting on the edge of the bed, his hand on her swollen belly. "That's work enough." The twins came early, during a January blizzard that trapped Doc Watson at the Henderson Ranch, delivering Martha's fifth child. It was Sarah Morrison who helped deliver them, with Daniel assisting, his hand steady despite his terror. "Two boys," Sarah announced, exhausted but triumphant, small but perfect. They named them Samuel and Thomas, after Sam Rodriguez and Tom Henderson, both of whom had proven themselves true friends over the years. The twins were indeed small, fitting in Daniel's palm like baby birds, but they were fighters from the start. 5 children, Clara said a few days later, nursing both twins while Margaret toddled about, and James helped by bringing his mother everything he could reach. "I think we might be done, Mr. Cooper." "Whatever you want," Daniel said, though privately he thought 5 was a good number. The house was full of laughter and chaos, exactly the opposite of the quiet life he'd once thought he wanted. The years rolled by like the seasons, each bringing its own challenges and joys. The railroad arrived with great fanfare, transforming Pine Creek from a frontier town to a proper city almost overnight. Daniel found himself on the city council, much to his dismay, while Clara organized the ladies' auxiliary, the school board, and somehow found time to start a library. "You can't say no to everything," Clara told him one evening as he grumbled about another council meeting. "I'm a rancher, not a politician." "You're a leader," Clara corrected. "People look up to you, trust you. The town needs that." She was right as usual. Daniel found himself mediating disputes, organizing the town's defense against claim jumpers who came with the railroad, and even giving a speech when President Roosevelt visited on his Western tour. "Never thought I'd shake hands with a president," Daniel told Clara that night, still slightly stunned. "I did," Clara said simply. "You're the kind of man presidents should meet. Real, honest, hardworking. You represent what America should be." Through it all, their love only grew stronger. They fought sometimes. Clara's fire had not dimmed with motherhood, and Daniel could be stubborn as a mule when he thought he was right. But their arguments were passionate rather than bitter, usually ending in laughter or lovemaking or both. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked one night, 15 years into their marriage. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were scattered, James helping Sam with the evening chores, Margaret reading in her room, the twins wrestling in the yard, while little Sarah, their surprise 6th child, played with her doll. "Regret what?" "Not getting your quiet, peaceful wife. Your simple life." Daniel pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair, still touched with fire despite the few silver strands that had appeared. "Every single day," he said seriously. Clara stiffened, pulling back to look at him, hurt flashing in her eyes. "Every single day," Daniel continued, grinning. "I thank God I didn't get that quiet wife. Can you imagine how boring that would have been? Clara hit him with a pillow she'd been embroidering, but she was laughing. You're impossible. You love me anyway." "I do," Clara said, suddenly serious. "More than I ever thought possible." They were interrupted by James, now 17 and taller than his father, coming around the corner. "Pa, there's a rider coming. Looks like trouble." Daniel stood, his hand automatically going to his gun. Old habits died hard, even in peaceful times. The rider was indeed coming fast, and as he got closer, Daniel recognized Jake Morrison's youngest son, Paul. "Mr. Cooper!" Paul gasped, sliding from his horse. "Pa sent me. There's been an accident at the mine. Cave-in. They need every man who can help." It was like stepping back in time, except now it was the newer, larger mine owned by an Eastern company that didn't care much about safety. Daniel was moving before Paul finished talking, calling for Sam and the hands. "I'm coming," James said. "No," Daniel said firmly. "You stay here. Protect your mother and the children." "Pa?" "That's an order, son." James's jaw tightened, so like Daniel's own stubborn expression, but he nodded. Clara appeared with medical supplies, her face pale but determined. "Don't even try to tell me to stay," she said. "Wouldn't dream of it," Daniel replied, knowing better than to argue. The scene at the mine was grimly familiar but worse than before. This time, 20 men were trapped, and the company foreman was more concerned about the equipment than the lives. "We can't risk further collapse," the foreman, a soft Eastern man named Whitfield, was saying. "The company's investment—" Daniel grabbed him by the collar, lifting him off his feet. I don't give a damn about your company's investment. There are men down there. We're getting them out. You have no authority. I have this, Daniel said, his free hand resting on his gun. And I have them. He nodded toward the crowd of miners' families and townspeople who had gathered. Your choice, Whitfield. Help us save these men, or explain to your company why you were run out of town on a rail. Whitfield paled, nodding rapidly. Daniel released him and turned to the crowd. Same as before, folks. We work in shifts. Jake, you and your boys shore up what's standing. Sam, take a team and start clearing rocks. Doc Watson, set up the medical tent. They worked through the night, Clara coordinating the women who brought food and water, tended wounds, and kept spirits up. It was harder than before, the collapse more extensive, but Pine Creek had grown tougher and more united over the years. There! Someone shouted near dawn. I can see movement. The first miner emerged, bloody but walking, and a cheer went up. One by one, they brought them out, 17 men, all alive, though many were badly injured. But 3 were still missing, trapped deeper in the mine. The whole thing could come down, Jake warned, studying the trembling support beams. Anyone who goes in might not come out. I'll go, Daniel said. But before he could move, a hand fell on his shoulder. No, Pa. I'll go. Daniel turned to find James standing there, tall and strong and determined. You were ordered to stay home, and I disobeyed. Ground me later. Right now you need someone young and strong and small enough to fit through tight spaces. That's me. Daniel wanted to refuse, wanted to protect his son from danger, but he saw Clara's fire in James's eyes, his own stubbornness in the set of his jaw. I'll go with him, Paul Morrison volunteered. And me, said Timothy Watson, Doc's son. 3 boys, barely men, volunteering to risk their lives for strangers. Daniel's chest tightened with pride and fear in equal measure. Be careful, he said finally. Come back safe, or your mother will never forgive me. James grinned, his mother's smile. Always do, Pa. The waiting was agony. Daniel stood at the mine entrance, every muscle tense, while Clara gripped his hand so tight he thought she might break his fingers. 20 minutes passed, then 30, then 40. Then a shout from inside. We found them! Coming out! James emerged first, supporting a miner who was barely conscious. Paul and Timothy followed with the other 2. All 3 boys were covered in dirt and blood, but grinning triumphantly. Clara broke free from Daniel's grip, running to embrace their son. Don't you ever scare me like that again, James Daniel Cooper? Sorry, Ma, James said, but his grin didn't fade. Had to do what was right. Pa taught me that. Daniel pulled both of them into his arms, his wife and son, holding them tight. Around them, families reunited, the saved miners were tended to, and Pine Creek once again proved that it took care of its own. The mine never reopened. Whitfield and his company pulled out, faced with a united town that demanded better safety measures than they were willing to provide. Some called it an economic disaster, but Daniel saw it differently. Lives are worth more than gold, he said at the town meeting that followed. We've proven that today. The crisis passed, but it marked a turning point. James, having proven himself, began taking more responsibility at the ranch. Margaret, now 15 and as beautiful as her mother, announced she wanted to go to college back east to study medicine like Doc Watson. A lady doctor? Barbara Whitman, still clinging to her position as social arbiter despite the changing times, was scandalized. A doctor, Margaret corrected firmly, her mother's fire burning bright. The lady part is irrelevant to healing people. Clara beamed with pride while Daniel tried to wrap his head around his little girl leaving for the city. The twins, now 13, were talking about engineering school, fascinated by the machines that were beginning to transform the West. Even little Sarah, only 8, declared she would be a teacher and a writer and possibly a ranch owner too. We've raised revolutionaries, Daniel told Clara one night as they lay in bed, listening to the house settle around them. We've raised thinkers, Clara corrected, independent spirits who know their own minds. Like their mother. And their father. You're the one who taught them to stand up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. That was just common sense, Clara laughed, curling against him. Daniel Cooper, you wouldn't know common sense if it bit you. You run into burning buildings, face down gunmen, and stand up to mining companies. Our children learned courage from watching you, and they learned determination from you. Do you know Margaret has been corresponding with medical schools? She's already planning her applications. She told me. She also told me James has been writing to a girl in Denver. Daniel sat up. What? When did this happen? Oh, darling, Clara laughed. Our children are growing up. James is nearly 18. Did you think he'd never notice girls? I thought I had more time, Daniel grumbled. Time for what? To figure out how to threaten potential suitors without your daughter lecturing me about modern sensibilities. Clara's laughter filled the room, rich and warm as honey. Oh, my love, you never had a chance. These children are going to live lives we can barely imagine. She was right, of course. The West was changing, modernizing at a pace that left old-timers shaking their heads. Automobiles were beginning to appear on Pine Creek streets, competing with horses for space. Electric lights were being installed in the newer buildings. The telephone exchange had 5 operators now, connecting Pine Creek to the wider world. Clara's dress shop had evolved too, becoming Cooper and Associates Fine Clothing, with a catalog that reached customers across 3 states. Amy Patterson, now Amy Sullivan after marrying the bank president's son, managed the day-to-day operations while Clara focused on design and what she called strategic planning. You're building an empire, Daniel accused one day, finding her surrounded by order forms and sketches. I'm building a legacy, Clara corrected, something our daughters can inherit if they choose, or use as proof that women can succeed in business. And if they all become doctors and engineers and writers, then I'll sell it to Amy and retire to raise horses with you. Horses? Since when are you interested in horses? Clara smiled mysteriously. Since I realized I'm going to need something to do once the children are grown. I can't just sit on the porch and knit. Heaven forbid, Daniel said dryly. The seasons turned and changes came fast. Margaret left for medical school in Boston, her trunk packed with practical clothes Clara had made and books Doc Watson had given her. James took over more of the ranch operations, proving himself a natural leader with innovative ideas about breeding and land management. He's going to surpass us both, Sam Rodriguez said, watching James work with a difficult horse. That boy has your patience and his mother's intelligence. He has something else too, Daniel observed. Ambition. He doesn't just want to maintain the ranch. He wants to build something bigger. It was true. James had plans for expanding, for bringing in new breeds, for experimenting with crops as well as cattle. He'd been corresponding with agricultural colleges, reading everything he could get his hands on about modern farming techniques. The twins, Samuel and Thomas, were inseparable and brilliant, always building something or taking something apart to see how it worked. They'd rigged a water pump system for Clara's garden that was so efficient, farmers from miles around came to study it. They'll change the world, Clara said, watching them explain their latest invention to a group of admirers. Or blow it up trying, Daniel said, remembering the small explosion that had resulted from one of their experiments. Little Sarah was the surprise. Quiet where her siblings were bold, she observed everything with large, solemn eyes, and wrote it all down in journals she filled at an alarming rate. She's documenting us, Clara realized one day, finding Sarah's latest journal. Listen to this. Papa pretends to grumble about town meetings, but he always goes early and stays late. He cares more than he admits. Mama knows this, and doesn't tease him about it, which is true love. The child's too observant for her own good, Daniel said, but he was secretly pleased. Then came the telegram that changed everything. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in September, delivered by young Tommy Henderson, who'd taken over the telegraph office. It's from Philadelphia, Mrs. Cooper, Tommy said, hat in hand. Clara opened it with trembling fingers, read it, and sank into a chair. What is it? Daniel asked, alarmed. William Thornton is dead, Clara said flatly. His widow is contesting his will. She's claiming James is William's son and heir. The words hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire, threatening to consume everything they'd built. Daniel felt rage building in his chest, the old violent feelings he'd worked so hard to control. How? Was all he managed. I don't know. Maybe William told her, maybe she investigated, maybe it's just a guess based on timing. But she's demanding James submit to evaluation by their lawyers. Like hell, Daniel said. We can't just ignore it, Clara said, though her face was pale. If we do, she could make it public, make accusations. James doesn't know, Daniel said quietly. It had been a decision they'd made together to wait until James was older to tell him the truth about his biological father. He has to know now, Clara said, tears starting to fall, before someone else tells him. They called James in from the range, asked him to sit, and told him the truth. All of it. Clara's engagement to Thornton, the attempted institutionalization, the assault, the escape, Daniel's immediate acceptance of James as his own. James sat silent through it all, his face unreadable. When they finished, he stood and walked to the window, staring out at the ranch he'd grown up on, the only home he'd ever known. So, he said finally, his voice carefully controlled, I'm not actually a Cooper. You are absolutely a Cooper, Daniel said fiercely. You're my son in every way that matters. Biology doesn't change that. James turned to face them, and Daniel saw his own stubborn pride in the boy's face. This woman, Thornton's widow. She wants money? Probably, Clara said. The Thornton fortune is substantial, and apparently William died without children from his marriage. But I'm not his child, James said firmly. I'm Daniel Cooper's son. That's what my birth certificate says. That's what everyone knows. And that's the truth as far as I'm concerned. James, Clara started. No, Ma. I don't care what some widow back east wants. I don't care about Thornton money. I have everything I need right here. A family that loves me, work that matters, a future I'm building with my own hands. That woman can take her lawyers and her accusations and go to hell. Language, Clara said automatically, but she was crying and smiling at the same time. Daniel stood, placed his hands on James's shoulders. You sure about this, son? The Thornton money could set you up for life. James met his eyes steadily. I'm already set up for life, Pa. You taught me to work hard, to stand for what's right, to protect what's mine. Ma taught me to think for myself, to never let anyone define me, to fight for my independence. What could Thornton money give me that you haven't already given me? Daniel pulled his son into a fierce embrace, feeling Clara's arms wrap around them both. They stood there, the three of them, while something settled into place, something that had always been true but needed saying. We'll need a lawyer, Clara said finally, practical even through her tears. A good one. I know someone, Daniel said. Marcus Webb, in Denver. He handled that land dispute for us last year. Within a week, Marcus Webb had arrived in Pine Creek, a sharp young lawyer with a mind like a steel trap. He reviewed the documents, interviewed the family, and developed a strategy. We deny everything, he said simply. Make them prove their accusations. Meanwhile, we countersue for harassment and defamation. The widow is on shaky ground legally. She has no proof, only speculation. But if she makes it public, Clara worried. Then we tell our truth, Webb said. A violent man who tried to institutionalize his fiancée, who assaulted her, who she fled from in fear for her life. A good man who married her, claimed her child as his own, raised that child with love and honor. Which story do you think people will side with? He was right. The widow, faced with the prospect of a public battle that would drag the Thornton name through the mud, backed down. She withdrew her claim in exchange for the family's silence about William's past behavior. It's over, Clara said when the final papers were signed. It was never really a threat, James said. She didn't understand what we have here. We're Coopers. We don't run, we don't bend, and we sure as hell don't break. Clara laughed, shaking her head. You sound just like your father. Which one? James asked, then grinned. Never mind. I know which one. The one who matters. The crisis passed, leaving them stronger for having faced it together. Margaret wrote from Boston, furious that she hadn't been there to give Thornton's widow a piece of her mind. The twins designed what they called a lawyer trap that would drop anyone with legal papers into a pit. Sarah wrote it all down in her journal, documenting the family's triumph over adversity. Life resumed its rhythm. James began courting the girl from Denver in earnest, bringing her to visit the ranch. Her name was Elizabeth, and she was nothing like Clara had expected. Quiet, where Clara was fiery. Gentle, where Clara was fierce. But she had a core of steel beneath the softness, and she looked at James like he hung the moon. "She's perfect for him," Clara told Daniel. "She'll balance his intensity, give him peace." "Like you gave me peace?" Daniel teased. "I never gave you peace. I gave you purpose." "Same thing," Daniel said, kissing her. They were grandparents within 2 years. James and Elizabeth's son born on a spring morning with his grandfather's eyes and his grandmother's stubborn chin. They named him Daniel William Cooper, and if anyone noticed the irony of the middle name, they kept it to themselves. Margaret became the first female doctor in Pine Creek, returning home with her degree and a determination to modernize medical care in the growing city. The twins went to engineering school together, their inventions already attracting attention from companies back east. Sarah surprised everyone by publishing a story in a national magazine, a thinly veiled fiction about a woman who came west with fire in her voice and changed a town. "You should write our real story," Clara told her youngest daughter. "I am," Sarah said simply. "Every day in my journals. Someday, when you're both gone, people will want to know how you built all this." "We didn't build it alone," Daniel said, looking out at Pine Creek, now a proper city with paved streets and electric lights, but still with the spirit of the frontier town it had been. "We had help. The whole town, really." "That's the point," Sarah said. "It's not just your story or Ma's story. It's Pine Creek's story. It's America's story. People coming together, building something from nothing, taking care of each other." She was right, Daniel realized. Their story was bigger than just two people finding love. It was about community, about courage, about the choices that define a life. Years later, when his hair was completely gray and Clara's fire had mellowed to a warm glow, Daniel stood on the same spot where he'd waited for a quiet mail-order bride. Pine Creek had grown around them, buildings rising where empty land had been, automobiles outnumbering horses, the modern world encroaching on their frontier. "Regrets?" Clara asked, coming to stand beside him, her hand finding his with the ease of decades of practice. "Not a one," Daniel said. "You?" "Only that it went so fast," Clara said. "Seems like yesterday I was stepping off that stage, terrified and trying not to show it." "You didn't look terrified. You looked like you were ready to conquer the world." "I was terrified," Clara admitted, "but then I saw you, and something in me recognized home. Even though I wasn't what you expected? Especially because you weren't what I expected. I didn't need another man with plans for who I should be. I needed a man who'd let me be myself, who'd stand beside me while I figured it out." "And did you? Figure it out?" Clara looked around at their town, their family, their life. James was running the ranch now, expanding it into one of the largest operations in Montana. Margaret had opened a clinic that served 3 counties. The twins were building bridges and dams that would last generations. Sarah was writing stories that were being published nationwide, and little Daniel William was already showing signs of his grandfather's steady strength and his grandmother's fierce spirit. "I figured out what matters," Clara said. "Love, family, community, standing for what's right, building something that lasts. Everything else is just details." Daniel pulled her close, this woman who'd arrived with fire in her voice and transformed not just his life, but an entire town. "You know what I realized?" "What's that?" "I was ready for a quiet marriage." You walked in with fire in your voice. And that fire, it didn't just stay, it spread. To me, to our children, to this whole damn town. Pine Creek is what it is because Clara Winters Cooper refused to be quiet. Clara laughed, the sound still capable of making his heart skip after all these years. "Clara Cooper," she corrected. "I've been Clara Cooper longer than I was ever Clara Winters." "And you'll be Clara Cooper for the rest of our days," Daniel promised. "The rest of our days," Clara agreed and kissed him there on Main Street, in full view of anyone who cared to look, just as she had kissed him on their wedding day, with passion and promise, and that fire that had never dimmed. The sun set over Pine Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Daniel Cooper held his wife close, grateful beyond words that his quiet, peaceful plans had been shattered by a woman with fire in her voice who had walked into his life and stayed. The autumn of 1925 brought changes that even Clara, with all her forward-thinking ways, hadn't fully anticipated. Pine Creek had become a small city, with a population pushing 10,000 souls, and the Cooper family had grown along with it. Daniel stood on the hill overlooking the valley, watching automobiles navigate streets where he'd once chased rustlers on horseback, and felt the weight of 60 years settling into his bones. "You're brooding again," Clara said, approaching with her careful steps. The years had slowed her too, though the fire in her eyes remained undimmed. "Not brooding. Thinking." "About?" "About how I almost missed all of this," Daniel said, gesturing at the view. "If Margaret hadn't gotten sick, if you hadn't come in her place, if I'd sent you away that first day." "But you didn't," Clara said, slipping her hand into his. "You helped me when you had no reason to. You stood between me and William when it wasn't your fight. You chose to love James when you knew the truth. Every choice you made led us here." They were interrupted by the sound of an automobile climbing the ranch road. Daniel recognized the vehicle. It belonged to Thomas Whitfield III, grandson of the mining foreman Daniel had confronted years ago. Young Whitfield was a lawyer now, and his presence rarely meant good news. "Mr. Cooper, Mrs. Cooper," Whitfield said, climbing out of his car. He was a soft-looking man, like his grandfather, but with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "I'm afraid I have some unfortunate news." Daniel's hand moved instinctively to where his gun used to rest, though he hadn't worn one regularly in years. "What kind of news?" "There's a development company from Chicago. They're interested in Pine Creek, specifically in buying up ranch land for development. They've already acquired the Henderson place and 2 others." "Tom Henderson sold?" Clara asked, surprised. "The Hendersons had been here almost as long as the Coopers." "Tom died last month, ma'am. His son sold to pay debts. The company is offering substantial sums, well above market value." "Our land isn't for sale," Daniel said firmly. "I assumed as much. However, they're also pursuing another avenue. They're claiming that several of the original land grants, including yours, were improperly filed. They're challenging ownership in court." Clara's hand tightened on Daniel's arm. "Can they do that?" "They can try," Whitfield said. "I've looked into it and your paperwork appears solid, but they have significant resources and connections in Washington. They could make things difficult." After Whitfield left, Daniel and Clara sat on their porch, the same porch where they'd made so many decisions over the years. "We fight," Clara said simply. "We're not as young as we were," Daniel pointed out. "This kind of fight could take years, cost everything we've built." "Then we'd better get started," Clara said with a ghost of her old fire. "Call the children home." All of them. Within a week, the Cooper children had assembled. James came from his own ranch 20 miles north, Elizabeth and their 3 children in tow. Margaret closed her clinic temporarily, arriving with her husband Robert, a fellow doctor she'd met in Boston, and their twin daughters. The twins, Samuel and Thomas, took leave from their engineering firm in Denver. Sarah came from New York, where she'd been living while writing for a magazine, bringing with her a surprise, a fiancé named David, a fellow writer with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers. "The gang's all here," James said, looking around the dinner table that groaned under the weight of Clara's cooking. "Just like old times?" "Not quite," Margaret said. "We're all older, supposedly wiser." "Speak for yourself," Thomas said. "Sam and I are still young and stupid." "Just stupid," Samuel corrected, earning a laugh from everyone. Daniel stood, raising his glass of whiskey. "I'm glad you're all here. Your mother and I have something to discuss with you." He explained the situation, the threat to their land, the possibility of losing everything. The room grew quiet as the implications sank in. "So we fight," James said, echoing his mother's words. "We pool our resources, hire the best lawyers, and fight." "It's not that simple," Margaret said, ever practical. "These development companies have deep pockets. They could drag this out, bleed us dry." "Then we get creative," Sarah said. "This isn't just a legal battle. It's a story. David and I can write about it, generate public support." Nobody likes seeing families forced off their land by big corporations. Sam and I have connections in Denver, Thomas added. Engineers, businessmen who remember what unchecked development does to communities. I can rally the medical community, Margaret said. Emphasize what losing ranch land means for the local economy, for families who've been here for generations. Daniel looked around the table at his children, each brilliant in their own way, each carrying a piece of Clara's fire and his own stubbornness. This won't be easy. They'll dig into our past, try to find leverage. Let them dig, James said firmly. We have nothing to hide. But of course, every family has secrets, and the development company's investigators were thorough. Within a month, they'd found the old records from Philadelphia, the story of Clara's flight, the questions about James's parentage. They're trying to claim that because James might not be your biological son, the land transfer to him is invalid, Marcus Webb explained. He'd aged well, his hair silver now, but his mind still sharp. That's ridiculous, Clara said. Legally, yes, but they're not trying to win on merit. They're trying to make this painful enough that you'll sell for whatever they offer, just to make it go away. Never, Daniel said quietly, but with such conviction that everyone in the room felt it. The legal battles began, but so did the war for public opinion. Sarah's articles appeared in national magazines, telling the story of Pine Creek, of families who'd built something from nothing. She wrote about her parents, the unlikely love story that had begun with a mail-order bride who never arrived, and the cousin who came instead. You're romanticizing it, Clara said, reading one of the articles. I'm telling the truth, Sarah corrected. Just because it sounds like a romance doesn't mean it isn't true. The town rallied behind them. Jake Morrison, now in his 70s but still working his forge, organized the old-timers. Nobody pushes the Coopers off their land, he declared. Not while any of us are still breathing. But the development company had their own weapons. They brought in experts who questioned the original surveys, lawyers who tied up the court with motions and delays, and worse, they started buying the loyalty of newer residents who didn't remember what Pine Creek had been. They're dividing the town, Barbara Whitman said. She'd mellowed over the years, and now, faced with outside threats, she stood firmly with the Coopers. Promising jobs, prosperity, progress. Progress, Daniel spat the word. They want to tear down everything we built and put up factories and tenements. The stress took its toll. Clara, who'd always been the strongest person Daniel knew, began to falter. She tired easily, her breath coming short during their evening walks. Just tired, she insisted when Daniel expressed concern. But Doc Watson, Margaret's colleague now, as she'd taken over most of his practice, was less optimistic. Her heart, he told Daniel privately, it's wearing out. She needs rest, no stress. Have you met my wife? Daniel asked bitterly. She doesn't know how to rest. But Clara must have sensed something because she began putting her affairs in order with quiet efficiency. She updated her will, wrote letters to each of the children, and spent hours teaching Amy Sullivan's daughter the most complex techniques of dressmaking. You're not dying, Daniel told her one night, fear making his voice rough. I won't let you. Clara smiled, touching his weathered face with gentle fingers. My stubborn cowboy, still thinking you can protect me from everything. I can try. You have. For over 40 years you've protected me, loved me, given me a life I never dreamed possible. But Daniel, some fights we can't win. Don't say that. I need to say it. I need you to hear it. If something happens to me, nothing will happen. If something happens, Claire continued firmly, I need you to know that every day with you has been a gift. From that first day when you could have sent me away but didn't, to now, when we're old and gray and still arguing about everything. Clara, promise me you'll keep fighting for our land. Not for me, but for what it represents. For James and Elizabeth's children, for Margaret's daughters, for all the grandchildren yet to come. Promise me. I promise, Daniel said, pulling her close, feeling how fragile she'd become. But you're going to be here to see us win. The hearing was set for November 15th, 1925. The entire family prepared to attend, along with half of Pine Creek. But the night before, Clara collapsed in the kitchen, her heart finally giving out under the strain. Daniel caught her as she fell, cradling her in his arms as James ran for Margaret as the family gathered around them. "No," Daniel said over and over. "No, you can't leave. We have the hearing tomorrow. We're going to win. You have to be there." Clara's eyes fluttered open, still that brilliant green despite the pain. "You'll win without me," she whispered. "You always were stronger than you knew." "I'm nothing without you." "That's not true." Her voice was fading, but she fought to speak. "You're Daniel Cooper, the man who saved horses from a burning barn, who stood up to William Thornton, who loved a child that wasn't his blood, who built this family, this ranch, this life." She touched his face one last time. "You're the man I fell in love with the moment I saw you, even when I was too scared to admit it. Clara, please tell them," she whispered, looking at their children gathered around. "Tell them I love them. Tell them to keep the fire burning." Clara Winters Cooper died at 11:47 p.m. on November 14, 1925, surrounded by her family, held in the arms of the man who'd given her freedom when she needed it most. The hearing was postponed out of respect, but Daniel insisted on attending when it was rescheduled a week later. He stood in that courtroom, his children flanking him, and spoke with a clarity that surprised everyone who expected him to be broken by grief. "My wife came to Pine Creek 47 years ago," he said, his voice carrying through the packed courtroom. "She came expecting nothing, having lost everything. This town, this land, gave her a chance to build something new. She took that chance and built not just a business, not just a family, but a community." He looked at the development company's lawyers, soft men in expensive suits who'd never worked the land, never built anything with their own hands. "You want to take our land because you see profit. But you don't understand what this land means. Every acre has been paid for in sweat and blood. Every building in Pine Creek tells a story of someone's dream, someone's struggle, someone's triumph. You can't buy that. You can't develop it. You can't improve on it." "Mr. Cooper," the judge interrupted gently, "while your sentiment is appreciated, we need to address the legal matters." "The legal matters are simple," Marcus Webb stood up. "We have here the original land grants, properly filed and recorded. We have 47 years of tax records, all paid in full. We have improvement records showing how the Cooper family has developed and maintained their land. And we have this." He produced a document that made the development company's lawyers shift nervously. A letter from the Department of the Interior confirming the validity of the Cooper land grant and praising the family's stewardship of the land. It seems someone in Washington was very interested in Mrs. Cooper's story, particularly after reading Sarah Cooper's articles. Sarah smiled slightly from her seat. She'd done more than write articles. She'd called in every favor, every connection from her years in New York. The judge reviewed the documents, then looked at the development company's lawyers. "It seems your challenge has no merit. The Cooper land grant is valid, has been properly maintained and transferred, and will remain in the Cooper family's possession." The courtroom erupted in cheers. Daniel stood still, feeling Clara's absence like a physical wound, but also feeling her presence in the victory, in their children's faces, in the community that had rallied around them. Outside the courthouse, Pine Creek had gathered to celebrate. Jake Morrison, tears streaming down his weathered face, gripped Daniel's hand. "She would have been so proud." "She is proud," Daniel corrected. "Somewhere, she's watching and probably telling us we took too long to win." That evening, the family gathered at the ranch. Daniel stood on the porch where he and Clara had spent so many evenings, looking out at the land they'd fought to keep. "What now, Pa?" James asked, coming to stand beside him. "Now we do what your mother would want. We keep building. We keep fighting for what's right. We keep the fire burning." "The development company won't give up," Margaret warned. "They'll try again." "Then we'll fight again," Daniel said simply, "and we'll win again. Because that's what Coopers do." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in the same shades of gold and crimson that had welcomed Clara to Pine Creek all those years ago, Daniel felt a warm breeze that carried the scent of lavender and something spicy, something uniquely Clara. "I know, darling," he said quietly. "I know you're still here." The years that followed were both harder and easier than Daniel expected. Harder because Clara's absence was a constant ache, an empty space at his side that nothing could fill. Easier because she had left him with so much, children who carried her strength, a community that honored her memory, and a love that transcended death. James took over more of the ranch operations, modernizing with tractors and new irrigation systems while still maintaining the connection to the land that Daniel had taught him. Elizabeth proved to be a formidable partner, her quiet strength complementing James's intensity. Their children, Daniel William, Clara Marie, and little Thomas, grew up on the same land their grandfather had fought to preserve. Margaret expanded her clinic into a full hospital, the Clara Winters Cooper Memorial Hospital, funded in part by Sarah's increasingly successful writing career. She never stopped fighting for modern medical care in rural areas, and her daughters followed in her footsteps, both becoming doctors. The twins, Samuel and Thomas, designed a water management system that transformed agriculture in the valley, allowing smaller ranchers to thrive alongside the larger operations. They married sisters from Denver, bringing them to Pine Creek where they raised their families side by side, their children as inseparable as they had been. Sarah's writing evolved from magazine articles to novels, each one exploring themes of frontier life, family, and the courage of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Her first novel, Fire in Her Voice, was a barely fictionalized account of her parents' story. It became a bestseller, bringing attention to Pine Creek and the values it represented. "You've made us famous," Daniel told her when the book was published. "I've told our story," Sarah corrected. "People need to know that America wasn't built by the wealthy and powerful. It was built by people like you and Mama, who worked hard, stood for what was right, and never gave up." David, Sarah's husband, proved to be a good man, supportive of her career and genuinely interested in the family he'd married into. They had 2 children, both girls, both writers from the time they could hold pencils. The development company made 2 more attempts to acquire the Cooper land, once through political pressure and once through economic manipulation. Both times, the family stood firm, the community rallied, and the attempts failed. Eventually, the company gave up, moving on to easier targets. "We won," James said after the last attempt failed. "Your mother won," Daniel corrected. "She built the connections, the reputation, the foundation that made us strong enough to fight. We just finished what she started." Daniel lived to see the Great Depression, watching as Pine Creek struggled but survived, the community Clara had helped forge supporting each other through the hard times. He lived to see the Second World War, sending 2 grandsons off to fight, both returning home safe. He lived to see Pine Creek grow into a proper city while maintaining its soul, the values Clara had championed still evident in how neighbors treated each other. On his 90th birthday, the entire town turned out to celebrate. Daniel sat in the place of honor, surrounded by 4 generations of Coopers, and told stories of the old days. But the story everyone wanted to hear was the one they all knew by heart, how Clara Winters had stepped off a stagecoach with fire in her voice and changed everything. "She wasn't what I expected," Daniel said, his voice still strong despite his age. "I'd ordered, that's how we thought of it then, like ordering from a catalog. I'd ordered a quiet, modest schoolteacher. Instead, I got Clara. Fire and steel and courage I'd never seen before." "Were you disappointed, Grandpa?" Clara Marie asked, James's daughter, who carried her grandmother's name and more than a little of her spirit. "Disappointed." Daniel laughed, the sound carrying across the gathering. "Child, I thank God every day that Margaret Winters got sick. Not very charitable of me, I know, but if she hadn't, I'd have had my quiet life. And what a waste that would have been." He looked around at his family, his town, his life's work. "Your grandmother taught me something important. I thought I wanted peace. What I really wanted was purpose. She gave me that. She gave all of us that." As the celebration continued around him, Daniel found himself thinking about time, about choices, about the threads that weave a life together. One different decision, one small change, and none of this would exist. If Clara had taken a different stage, if he'd been too proud to help her, if she'd given up when Thornton came after her, if they'd sold the land when things got hard. But they hadn't. They'd stood firm, fought together, built something lasting. And now in the twilight of his life, Daniel could see the full tapestry of what they'd created. That night, after everyone had gone home, Daniel sat on the porch one last time. The stars were bright above Pine Creek, the same stars he'd slept under as a young cowboy, the same stars that had witnessed Clara's arrival, their wedding, their children's births, their victories and losses. "I'm tired, Clara," he said to the night. "I've kept my promise. The land is safe, the children are strong, the fire is still burning. I think it's time." The wind picked up, carrying that familiar scent of lavender and spice, and Daniel smiled. He could almost hear her voice, carried on the breeze. "About time, you stubborn cowboy. I've been waiting." Daniel Cooper died peacefully in his sleep on September 15th, 1948, 70 years to the day after he'd stood on Main Street waiting for a quiet mail-order bride. He was buried beside Clara on the hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with a single stone that read, "They built something that lasted." The funeral was the largest Pine Creek had ever seen. People came from across the state, across the country even, to pay respects to the last of the frontier giants. Sarah read from her father's journals, entries he'd kept secretly over the years, documenting not the big events but the small moments, Clara laughing at something the twins had done, teaching Margaret to sew, dancing with him in the kitchen when they thought no one was watching. James spoke about his father's courage, not just the physical courage everyone knew about, but the moral courage to do what was right even when it was hard. He taught us that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice, about choosing to love, to protect, to stand together. Margaret talked about his gentleness, hidden beneath the tough exterior. He never missed a birthday, never forgot to ask about our troubles, never was too busy to listen. The twins, with engineering precision, listed his accomplishments, the businesses he'd started, the people he'd employed, the infrastructure he'd helped build, but they ended with something simpler. He was our father, and he loved us. That's the greatest engineering feat of all, building a family that strong. Sarah had the last word, as the writer of the family. "My father thought he wanted a quiet life. My mother arrived with fire in her voice. Together, they created something neither could have imagined alone. They showed us that love isn't just about finding the right person. It's about becoming the right person for each other. It's about choosing to stay, to fight, to build, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." She looked out at the crowd, at Pine Creek spread below, at the mountains beyond. Their story isn't ending today. It continues in all of us who learn from them, who carry their values forward, who remember that with courage and love and sheer stubbornness, ordinary people can build extraordinary things. As the crowd dispersed, the Cooper children stood together at their parents' graves. The sun was setting, painting the sky in those familiar shades of gold and crimson. "Think they're arguing in heaven?" Thomas asked. "Definitely," Margaret said. "Mama's probably reorganizing the whole place while Papa grumbles about the changes. And secretly loves every minute of it," James added. They stood in comfortable silence, these children of fire and steel, watching the sun set over the land their parents had fought to preserve. In the distance, Pine Creek sparkled with electric lights, automobiles moved along paved streets, and modern life continued its relentless advance. But here, on this hill, with the wind carrying the scent of prairie grass and the faint echo of memory, Clara and Daniel Cooper's love story lived on. It lived in the land that remained in the family, in the businesses that bore their name, in the hospital that served the community, in the stories that would be told for generations. Most of all, it lived in the truth they'd proven, that sometimes, when you're ready for a quiet marriage, life sends you someone with fire in their voice instead. And if you're very, very lucky, they stay. The Cooper Ranch still stands today, run by James's great-grandchildren. The house has been modernized but carefully preserved, and Clara's portrait hangs in the parlor, those green eyes still blazing with the fire that transformed a cowboy's quiet plans into an extraordinary life. Visitors come from around the world to see where the famous love story took place, where Clara Winters became Clara Cooper, where a frontier town became a community that understood the value of standing together. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets just right, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, people swear they can see two figures on the porch of the old ranch house, a tall cowboy and a red-haired woman with fire in her voice, still watching over the land they loved, the family they built, and the legacy they left behind. The story of Daniel and Clara Cooper became legend in Pine Creek, told and retold with small variations but always the same heart. Two people who expected one thing from life and got something completely different, something infinitely better. It reminded everyone who heard it that love isn't about finding someone who fits your plans. It's about finding someone who makes you throw away your plans and build something better together. In the end, that's what Daniel Cooper discovered when Clara Winters stepped off that stagecoach with fire in her voice and steel in her spine. He'd been ready for a quiet marriage, a peaceful life, a gentle fading into the sunset. Instead, he got a wildfire that consumed his old life and forged something new from the ashes, a love that burned bright, a family that stood strong, and a legacy that would last for generations. And he wouldn't have had it any other way.